Hello everyone, I'm the Creeps Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I had this small bedroom at the end of the hallway in our old house. The door to my room faced directly down the hall towards my parents' room, and there was a large window on the wall next to my bed. My bed was pushed up against the far side of the room, so if I sat up, I could see almost the entire room and the hallway if the door was open. My parents usually left my door slightly ajar at night, so I wouldn't feel too closed off. I remember that night very clearly because it was one of those nights where the wind outside just wouldn't stop. You could hear it pushing against the windows and whistling under the cracks of the walls. Our house was old, and the wood panels made sounds all the time, creaking and clicking as they shifted with the weather. I was used to it. I slept with my little radio on every night. I didn't like the silence. It felt like the silence had a sound of its own, and that sound always felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my ears. That night, the radio was playing soft songs, slow ones, sad ones. I don't remember which song it was, but even now, when I hear certain songs from that time, I get chills down my arms and the back of my neck, and I feel like I'm that scared little kid again. I was laying on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind tap against the window pane, when suddenly there was this loud bang on the glass. It wasn't like something small hitting it, like a branch scratching or a pine cone falling from the gutter. It was a thud, a heavy hit, as if someone had slapped the window with their hand. My body jumped, my chest tightening so fast that it hurt. My first thought was that it was just the wind. Maybe the wind had knocked something against the glass. That had to be it. I pulled my blanket up under my chin, curled my toes, and tried to focus back on the radio, letting the singer's soft voice carry me back into sleep. But then I heard footsteps in my room. My room was big enough that you could walk in circles around the middle area. My dad used to walk around when helping me clean up toys or when reading something out loud to me, pacing back and forth. I knew what footsteps sounded like on my carpet. That's what I heard. I heard the sound of something moving across the carpet, slow and soft at first, just a shuffle, like someone adjusting their feet. I opened my eyes wide, staring straight up at the ceiling, not wanting to move, not wanting to look. I told myself it was the house. That was what adults always said. Houses settle. They make noises. But these noises didn't come from the walls or the roof. They were coming from the floor, from the space around my bed. I felt the air in the room change. The temperature was dropping, and it wasn't just a small chill. It felt like someone had opened a freezer and let all that biting cold air pour out into the room. My arms prickled with goosebumps, and my nose started to hurt with each breath I took in. I could see the shadow of my dresser and my toy box, and I kept staring at those, trying to focus on something real, so I wouldn't have to think about what else might be there. The song on the radio changed, but it didn't help. It was another slow song, sadder than the one before. The singer's voice sounded almost like crying. That sound mixed with the footsteps made my stomach twist, so hard I thought I was going to throw up right there in bed. I felt like something was circling me. I could hear the steps move from beside my closet door to the foot of my bed, then around to the other side near the window. Each time the footsteps moved, the air got colder. It was like I was laying in a bed made of ice. I tried to tell myself to just close my eyes and sleep, but I couldn't. My heart was slamming in my chest so loud I could feel the vibrations in my neck. I thought if I didn't move, if I just laid there and pretended to sleep, it would go away, but it didn't. It kept circling. I could feel something watching me. My eyes darted around the ceiling, looking for movement, shadows, anything, but the only thing I saw was the faint glow from the digital clock on my dresser. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided I had to run. My parents' room was down the hall, only a few steps away if I ran fast. I threw the blanket off me and swung my feet to the floor. The carpet felt rough and cold under my toes. I took a deep breath, ready to sprint. The footsteps stopped. That was almost worse, because now it was silent except for the sad voice on the radio and the wind outside, and that silence felt like it was waiting for me to move. I stood up and ran. As I ran across my room, I felt it. There was a spot in the middle of the room where the air felt so cold that it burned my skin. My breath came out in a white cloud, like it did on winter mornings when I waited for the school bus. For a split second, I stopped running. I couldn't help it. My legs froze up. The cold wasn't normal. It felt like it went straight into my bones, like something was grabbing me from the inside out. That's when I heard it. Just 2 words, but they sounded so close to my ear that I felt the warmth of them against my cheek. I'm lost. That was it. That's all it said. But it wasn't loud. It was almost like a whisper mixed with a sigh. My whole body tightened so hard that my knees almost gave out under me. I felt like I was about to pee myself right there on the carpet. I didn't wait another second. I ran. I ran out of my room, down the hall, and straight into my parents' room. I didn't even bother to wake them up. I just dove under their bed and pulled their old blanket down off the edge, so it covered the side of the bed, hiding me completely. I curled up tight under there, my knees pulled to my chest, my hands clenching the carpet until my knuckles hurt. I could hear their soft breathing above me, my mom's quiet snoring, my dad shifting on the mattress. I stayed under there for what felt like hours. I cried, but I kept it quiet. I didn't want to wake them up because I didn't want them to know how scared I was. I thought if I told them, then whatever was in my room would be mad at me for telling. At some point, I fell asleep under their bed. When I woke up in the morning, my dad was already up and getting ready for work. My mom was still asleep. I crawled out from under the bed slowly. The sun was coming in through their curtains, and it felt warm and safe. I went back to my room to get dressed for school. I stood at the doorway for a long time, staring inside. Everything looked normal. My toys were where I left them, my blankets were on the floor from when I ran out, and the radio was still on, playing some happy morning show. I stepped inside slowly. The air felt normal again, not cold or heavy. I walked over to the spot in the middle of the room where it had been so cold the night before. I stood there for a moment. Nothing, just carpet under my feet. I went to the window and looked out. There were no branches or leaves pressed against the glass. Nothing that could have caused the banging noise. The window was a little foggy from the temperature difference, but other than that, it was fine. I turned off my radio and started getting ready for school. That whole day I felt like my skin didn't fit right. Every time someone walked behind me in the hallway, I flinched. Every time the teacher called my name, my heart jumped in my chest like I was in trouble. When I got home that afternoon, I didn't go back into my room right away. I sat in the living room, watching TV, pretending I wasn't avoiding it, but I was. Eventually, my mom told me to go clean up my room before dinner. I walked down the hall slowly, my socks sliding a little on the wooden floor. I pushed my door open with my foot and stepped inside. It smelled like my room again, like old stuffed animals and that weird plastic smell from my toy bin. I picked up my blankets and put them back on the bed. I sat down on the edge for a while, looking at the carpet where I had felt that cold spot. I pressed my hand against it. It felt warm from the afternoon sun shining through the window. That night, I begged my parents to let me sleep on the floor in their room. My dad thought I was being silly, but my mom let me set up my sleeping bag next to her side of the bed. I slept there for 3 nights before my dad finally told me I needed to sleep in my own room again. I didn't hear the footsteps after that. I didn't hear the words again. But every night after that, when I laid down in my bed, I pulled the blankets up over my head, even if it was hot. I kept the radio on, but I stopped listening to the slow, sad station. I switched it to the late-night talk shows, where people were always laughing and talking about funny things, anything to keep my mind away from what happened. As I grew up, I tried to tell myself it was a dream. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it because I was half asleep. But no matter how many times I told myself that, I can still feel the cold on my skin when I think about it. I can still hear those words whispered so close to my ear that I felt them brush against my cheek. I'm lost. That's what it said. I never told my parents. I never told my friends. Even now, I don't like talking about it. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that. I don't know what it was. Maybe it really was just a half-awake dream mixed with the noises of an old house on a windy night. Maybe my brain filled in the gaps and created a voice from the sounds of the radio. That's what I tell myself so I can sleep at night. But even now, as an adult, when I wake up in the middle of the night and my room is dark and silent, I find myself staring at the spot on my floor where the moonlight hits, waiting to see if something moves across it. And every once in a while, if the room is quiet enough and the air is just a little too cold, I think I hear it again, so soft that I almost miss it, drifting across the room like a sigh in the dark. I'm lost. And every time I hear it, my chest tightens, and I feel like that little kid again, frozen on the carpet in the middle of the night, with my breath coming out in shaky white clouds, wondering if it will ever find its way out of my room. I was 16 when it happened. That night felt like any other humid summer night. The small fan by my bedside table was rattling away, its blades covered in thin layers of dust. I had fallen asleep around midnight after scrolling on my phone until the battery died. I remember waking up feeling thirsty, and the room was almost completely dark except for the faint yellow light coming from the streetlight outside. That dim glow came through my thin curtain and fell across my door, where I always hung my clean clothes to dry. I blinked a few times to let my eyes adjust. At first, all I saw was the familiar shape of my jeans folded over the top of the door and my shirts hanging off wire hangers. My grandmother was sleeping on a small mattress beside my bed because she was visiting for the weekend, snoring softly under her thin floral blanket. Everything was quiet, too quiet, except for the fan and her breathing. Then I noticed something odd. My clothes weren't still like they always were at night. They were moving gently, swaying back and forth, as if a light breeze was passing through them. But the fan wasn't even facing that direction, and my window was shut. I stared harder, my throat suddenly feeling dry and tight. I could see shapes moving behind my clothes, something shifting and rustling through the shirts. My brain was still half asleep, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I saw legs. They weren't normal legs. They were thin, almost sticks, but the skin was gray and covered in dark veins that stood out like roads on a map. The legs didn't look strong enough to stand on, yet they were holding up something tall behind my hanging clothes. I felt a chill spread up from my feet to my neck as I kept staring, trying to make sense of what was standing in my doorway. I blinked a few more times, rubbing my eyes hard until they watered. When my vision finally cleared, I saw him. I saw the entire thing standing there like he had been watching me sleep for hours. He was tall but extremely skinny, with a stomach so swollen it looked like he was starving but bloated at the same time. His skin was a pale gray color, almost like wet cement, and it was stretched so tight over his bones that I could see the shape of his ribs clearly. Dark blue veins ran all over his skin, thick and raised like cords underneath. His fingers were the worst part. They were unbelievably long and thin, moving through my clothes like spider legs. They didn't even look like human fingers. Each one was pointed at the end like broken sticks, curling and uncurling softly as they touched the fabric of my shirts. They looked strong enough to pierce right through me if he wanted to. My chest felt heavy as I forced myself to keep looking up at his face. His head was cone-shaped, coming to a slight point at the top, completely bald with no hair anywhere on his scalp. His chin was long and narrow, hanging down slightly as if it were too heavy for his thin neck. He didn't have eyelids, just big wet-looking eyes that bulged out of his skull. They were so wide and round that I could see my clothes reflected in them, even in the dark. His tiny mouth was puckered, just a small round opening, and it moved like he was sucking on an invisible lollipop. He just kept doing that over and over, his lips twitching inward and outward, making a soft smacking sound that I could almost hear over the fan. He was hunched over badly, his thin back curved forward so harshly that the top of his back stuck out like a broken branch. He was wearing what looked like an old hospital gown. It was torn along his back where his spine jutted out, and the fabric looked so thin and worn that it barely covered his gray, shriveled body. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. I didn't even know if I was awake or dreaming. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought I would pass out. I tried to scream, but my throat felt blocked, and the only sound that came out was a small croak. My eyes filled with tears as I tried again, feeling my chest tighten and my stomach twist. I turned to look at my grandmother sleeping on her mattress, just a foot away from my bed. I reached out and grabbed her shoulder, shaking her as hard as I could while I kept my eyes on that thing. It didn't move. It didn't step closer or back away. It just stood there, its big eyes staring straight at me without blinking, its mouth still puckering and smacking. I noticed more about him in those seconds. His head seemed too big for his body, but it tapered into that cone shape like his skull hadn't finished forming properly. His arms were longer than they should have been, hanging down past his knees. His skin sagged at his elbows, and his shoulders were narrow and bony. He had no hair anywhere, no eyebrows, no eyelashes, not even small body hair. His entire body looked hairless and shriveled like he had been soaking in water for too long. Except it wasn't soft looking, it was hard and thin and dry. Finally, My grandmother woke up with a small gasp, sitting up slightly and looking around with her tired eyes. As soon as she moved, I looked back towards the doorway, and he was gone, just like that. My clothes were still swaying a little bit, as if something had just brushed past them. My grandmother asked if I was okay, but I couldn't speak. I just kept looking at the doorway, waiting to see if he would come back. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I kept my blanket pulled up to my chin and my eyes wide open, staring at the door. My grandmother went back to sleep after a few minutes, thinking maybe I had a bad dream. But I knew I wasn't dreaming. I felt fully awake, and my throat still burned from trying to scream. In the weeks before that happened, there were strange things going on in the house. My bedroom door would slam shut randomly, even when the windows were closed. Sometimes it would lock itself from the inside, and I'd have to call my mom to use a butter knife to open it. I thought maybe it was the old door frame and the house settling, but it started happening almost every night. Sometimes it would slam so hard that the pictures on my wall would shake. One night, about a week before seeing him, I woke up feeling like hands were grabbing my feet and legs. It was like several hands were wrapped around my ankles and calves, squeezing them lightly. I tried to kick them off, but there was nothing there. I turned on the lamp next to my bed, but the feeling didn't go away immediately. My legs felt cold and numb for hours after that, and I couldn't go back to sleep. I also had horrible nightmares. Every night it felt like my brain was being forced to see the worst things it could imagine. I would wake up sweating and shaking, breathing hard like I had been running. Sometimes I'd wake up with tears on my pillow, but I wouldn't remember why I was crying. After I saw that gray man in my doorway, I couldn't take it anymore. I told my parents everything. I told them about the door slamming, about the hands on my legs, about the nightmares, and about him. At first, they thought maybe I was stressed out from school or from trying to figure out what I wanted to do after graduation. My dad even thought maybe I had sleep paralysis, but I wasn't paralyzed. I could move. I could shake my grandmother awake. I just couldn't scream properly. My mom believed me a little more than my dad. She called a priest to come bless the room. I remember the day he came. He was an older man with kind eyes, and he wore simple black clothes. He walked into my room with a small bottle of holy water and a Bible. He said a prayer in a calm, low voice and sprinkled the holy water along my door frame, my bed, and the windows. I just stood there feeling embarrassed, but also scared, because part of me thought it wouldn't work. After he left, the house felt different. My room felt lighter somehow. The door didn't slam shut randomly anymore. The nightmares became less and less over the next few weeks, until they stopped completely. I never saw the gray man again. Sometimes I wondered if the exorcism actually worked, or if it just gave my brain peace of mind, so it stopped creating these horrible things. I wondered if it was stress or sleep deprivation, or if it was something I really saw. Something that existed, but I wasn't supposed to see. All I know is that after that night, I never slept with my door open again. Even when I hang my clothes on the door frame now, I make sure to shut the door completely before going to bed. I don't care how hot it gets in the summer. I'd rather wake up drenched in sweat than wake up to see him standing there again, staring at me with those lidless eyes, his long pointed fingers moving through my shirts like he was trying to decide what to take with him. Years later, when I think back to that night, I can still see his shape in the darkness if I let my imagination run too far. I can see his big head and his swollen belly, his puckered mouth moving as if he was sucking on something invisible, his eyes wide and unblinking as he stared into me like he was trying to read every part of my mind. I can still hear the soft smacking sounds his lips made. I can still remember how my chest felt like it was being crushed under a weight I couldn't see. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up that night. What he would have done if he saw me sleeping and realized I couldn't see him watching me. But I did see him, and that changed everything. Maybe he was surprised I could see him. Maybe he thought humans weren't supposed to notice him at all. Whatever the truth is, that night taught me one thing for sure. If you ever feel like something is watching you from the doorway at night, it probably is. And if you can see it, it's too late to pretend it isn't there. When I was about 13 or 14, I lived out on this farm in North Carolina. But it wasn't the kind of farm people imagine when you say that word. There weren't rows of beans or corn stretching out to the road, no tractor lines cutting through rich black soil. Ours was a pine tree harvestry. Longleaf pines lined up in perfect rows, row after row, acre after acre. Pine needles were a big landscaping thing, so every year we'd rake them up and bale them like hay. My dad would load the bales onto the old flatbed and haul them into town to sell. It was quiet out there, too quiet sometimes, and the only sounds at night were the dogs barking at deer or possums or whatever else crept through the brush. Our house sat right in the middle of those trees, all 550 acres of them. It was a weird place. Some dentist built it back in the 30s, probably thought he'd retire in the woods. It had a huge living room with a window that stretched almost the whole length of the wall, probably 50 feet long. When you sat on the couch in winter, with the little bit of snow we got, you could see for a mile through those pines if the moon was out. The snow didn't really pile up thick like in the north, just a dusting that clung to the pine straw and froze it into hard little blades. But the moonlight would bounce off it enough to make everything visible, like faint silver daylight. I never liked that window. Even on normal nights, it felt like something was watching back at me. You couldn't see your own reflection in it when the lights were off. It was just black glass, empty, wide, and cold. The living room itself sat maybe 5 or 6 feet off the ground since the house was built on a slope, so if anything was right under the window, you wouldn't see it unless you pressed your face to the glass and looked straight down. I never did. One weekend, my cousin came over. He was about my age, and we'd hang out whenever we could. That night it was freezing outside, so we were tossing all kinds of stuff into the fireplace, just to see what would happen. Pine needles crackled fast and bright, little twigs snapped loud like firecrackers, and an old potato made a weird screaming noise as it roasted and split. Eventually the fire died down and we got bored, so we built a kingdom out of couch cushions and blankets right there in the living room. We had it set up like a fort, thick layers of quilts pulled from the hall closet, all of it facing the big black window. I remember feeling uneasy even before anything happened. Something about that window always did it to me, but I tried not to show it. My cousin was fearless compared to me, or maybe just better at pretending. It was quiet for a long time. We laid there looking up at the ceiling where the shadows from the dying fire flickered. I could hear the dogs barking way out in the distance. They weren't close to the house, probably somewhere near the back property line. I didn't think much of it because they barked at anything and everything: deer, armadillos, stray dogs, even shadows when the moonlight moved just right. My cousin sat up suddenly and stared out the window. He didn't say anything for a while. I kept asking him what he was looking at, but he just shushed me, eyes fixed on the trees outside. I felt the fear start to grow in my chest like a balloon inflating. When you're out there in the middle of nowhere, your mind plays tricks on you. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I finally sat up and looked too. At first, I didn't see anything, just rows and rows of pines disappearing into the dark. The moon was bright enough to light up the snow like a pale sheet, but the shadows between trees stayed black. He whispered that he thought he saw something moving. I squinted so hard my eyes watered, but for minutes there was nothing. Then I saw it. A shadow moved between 2 trees, about 100 yards out from the house. It wasn't running. It wasn't crouched. It just walked briskly from one tree to the next. My heart dropped straight down into my stomach. For a second, I thought it might be my eyes playing with me. Moonlight can do that. But then it happened again, a few minutes later, maybe 50 feet from where we first saw it. Another dark shape, walking smoothly between trees. It didn't duck or hesitate. It just moved like it belonged there. We sat frozen, eyes glued to the window. Neither of us said a word. We didn't even look at each other. Every time one shape disappeared, we would wait and scan for the next. Sometimes it would take 5 minutes, sometimes 2. But every time a figure appeared, walked a few steps, and vanished behind another tree. It wasn't like watching animals move in the woods. Animals dart and pause, flick their ears, check their surroundings. These shapes just walked with purpose. I tried to tell myself it was hunters, but no hunters came that deep into our land without permission, and nobody hunted at night. Plus, hunting season was over. Even poachers didn't come out in the snow at night to stalk pine trees. The federal paper land surrounding our farm went on for miles, and no one lived out there. If you saw someone, they intended to be seen. After what felt like half an hour, I saw something that made me feel like my chest was being squeezed tight. One of the shapes appeared again, but this time, instead of slipping behind the next tree, it started moving towards us. At first it was a fast walk, then it became a run. I couldn't see its face or details, just a black moving shape that seemed to stretch and grow bigger as it came closer, swallowing the pale spaces between trees. I felt like my heart stopped beating for a second. My cousin grabbed my arm, so hard his nails dug into my skin. We both scrambled out of our blanket fort and ran down the hallway to my dad's room. He woke up with his hair sticking out in all directions, eyes squinting in confusion. I remember him asking what was wrong, but neither of us could speak properly. All I could do was pull at his arm, trying to drag him to the living room. By the time we got him there, the window was just black again. No shapes, no movement, nothing. My dad cursed under his breath about us waking him up, but I saw the way his eyes flicked to the window and stayed there a little too long. We went around locking all the doors, every single one. Out there in the country, we never bothered with locks. Neighbors weren't close enough to worry about, and strangers didn't come down that dirt road. But that night we locked every door and checked each window twice. Every door was worse than the last to reach. Each time I turned a lock, I half expected someone to grab the handle from outside. My dad sat with us in the living room for the rest of the night, rifle propped against the arm of his chair. He turned on the small lamp by his seat, not the overhead light, so the window stayed black but the room was dimly lit. He dozed off after a while, chin dropped to his chest, but I didn't sleep. I sat curled up in my blanket, staring out that window, searching for any flicker of movement. When morning came and sunlight filled the living room, everything felt less scary but more real at the same time. I felt sick with tiredness and fear. My cousin and I waited until my dad was awake enough to come outside with us, and then we walked out into the cold yard. The sun was bright but gave off no warmth, and my breath fogged out in front of me with each step. We walked towards where we thought we saw the shapes. The snow wasn't deep, just a thin, crunchy layer over frozen pine straw, but it was enough to show footprints. They were everywhere. Footprints leading from tree to tree, deep impressions where someone had been standing for long stretches of time. They circled trees, moved between them in deliberate lines, but never wandered or turned back the way they came. It was like they were following a route only they knew. We followed the prints closer and closer to the house until we saw them right below the window. The tracks went right up to the wall beneath where I had been sitting all night. I thought about how I couldn't see directly down because of how high the living room sat off the ground. Whoever it was could have stood there for hours staring up at me, and I never would have known. My dad just stood there looking at the footprints, jaw set tight, eyes cold and distant. He didn't say a word. He didn't call the sheriff either. That wasn't his way. He just said we'd keep the dogs closer to the house from now on and make sure the rifle stayed loaded. That was it. We never spoke about it again. But that window never felt the same. Every time I walked past it, even in daylight, I felt the hair on my neck stand up like someone was standing under it again, looking up at me, waiting for night to fall. I walked into my aunt's room like I had done many times before, but I always hated going in there. We were living with my grandparents at the time because my parents were going through some problems with money. I was 13 back then, and I still remember that room like it's right in front of me now. The whole house smelled like old wood and soap, but her room had this stronger smell, a mix of dusty perfume bottles and the old metal of her lamp. The lamp wasn't normal. It was a 2-foot-tall Victorian-style doll with pale plastic skin and lifeless blue eyes. Its painted lips were pulled into a fake smile that showed 2 small dimples. Someone had turned it into a lamp by sticking a light bulb on top of its curly blonde hair, and it worked by raising or lowering its right arm. You had to hold its cold plastic hand to move the arm up to turn on the light or down to turn it off. The doll stood on a nightstand right next to her bed, facing the door, so every time anyone walked in, it looked like the doll was greeting them with that dead-eye smile. That day I was alone in the house. My grandma had gone to the store, and my grandpa was working in the garage outside. It was a quiet afternoon. The sun was coming through the lace curtains in the living room, making small patterns on the old carpet. I remember thinking it was nice to have some peace to myself. I wanted a blanket because I felt cold, and the closest one was in my aunt's closet. Her room was across the hallway from the living room. As I walked towards it, I could already feel that familiar tightness in my chest. I never liked being in there alone. It wasn't just the doll. Her room always felt heavier, like the air inside never moved. I tried to focus on 2 things that made me feel safer. First, it was mid-afternoon, and there was plenty of light coming through her curtains, so I wouldn't need to touch that doll's hand to turn the lamp on. Second, her closet was right next to the doorway, so I didn't have to step far into the room. I could just stand by the entrance, grab the blanket, and leave. I stepped inside, staring at the floor, so I wouldn't see the doll's face. I turned around quickly so my back would face it. I remember feeling my heart beat fast for no reason. I kept telling myself to hurry up and not think about it. I grabbed the brass handle of the closet and swung the door open. The closet smelled like fabric softener and old wood. I crouched down a bit to look at the bottom shelf where the folded blankets were stacked. I reached out for the thick maroon blanket with tassels on the edge. As I was pulling it out, I noticed something changed. It was a small thing at first, just a feeling that something was different behind me. At first, I thought it was in my head, but then I felt it clearly. The room was brighter. I could see the shadow from my own body getting darker against the closet wall in front of me. My back felt warm, like there was a small sun right behind me. The peach fuzz on the back of my neck lifted up slowly, like static pulling at every hair. My stomach dropped hard, and I froze there crouching with the blanket half pulled out. I felt like if I moved, something would grab me. My heart was beating so loud I could hear it in my ears. I told myself I was being stupid, that it was just the afternoon sun coming out from behind a cloud, or maybe the lamp was already on and I hadn't noticed. But deep inside, I knew the lamp had been off. I hadn't touched that doll's hand. No one had. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the blankets in the closet, but not really seeing them. Every part of my body was shaking. I wanted to run out screaming, but there was something inside me that said I needed to look first. My brain felt torn in two, half of it saying run, the other half saying look and see for yourself before you go. I hate that I looked. I hate that part of me forever. Slowly, I turned my head to the right to look over my shoulder. I tried to keep my eyes low so I wouldn't see its face, but my eyes moved up on their own. I saw the doll standing there on the nightstand, lit up brighter than I had ever seen. The bulb above its head glowed a warm yellow, casting shadows across its plastic face, making its smile look even deeper. But what made my knees almost give out was its right hand. It was raised up straight, pointing directly at me. The fingers were stiff, the thumbs slightly tucked in. The doll's dead eyes were staring at my face, and in that moment I felt like it wasn't just a lamp anymore. I couldn't move for a second. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the blanket onto the floor. My breath came in short gasps, and I felt tears fill my eyes. My throat felt tight and dry. Finally, my survival instinct broke through all the fear, and I jumped up and ran out of that room as fast as I could. I ran down the hallway, almost tripping over my own feet, and slammed into the living room wall. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I just kept running, through the kitchen and out the back door into the yard. I stood outside in the sun, breathing hard, looking at the grass, trying to calm down. My hands were cold and my legs felt weak. The garage door was closed, and I could hear my grandpa's tools clinking inside. I thought about going to him, telling him what happened, but I knew he would just say I was imagining things. I felt ashamed for feeling so scared, but my fear was real. My chest hurt like someone was pressing down on it. After a while, when my breathing slowed down, I sat on the back steps and stared at the yard. There was an old tree stump near the fence, and ants were crawling up and down it. I watched them to keep my mind away from the doll. But even as I sat there, I could feel its dead eyes in my mind, that stiff hand pointing straight at me. The thought of going back inside made me feel sick. I waited outside until I heard my grandma's car coming up the driveway. When she got out with bags of groceries, I helped her carry them in, but I didn't go near my aunt's room for the rest of that day. That night, I lay awake on the mattress on my grandparents' living room floor. I could hear the old clock ticking on the wall above me. The shadows from the streetlight came in through the thin curtains, making shapes on the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that doll with its raised arm. I pulled my blanket up to my chin and listened to the quiet house, hearing only the occasional creak of old wood as it settled. My body felt tired, but my mind stayed awake. I kept thinking about how the lamp worked. You had to hold the hand and lift it for the light to turn on. There was no timer, no remote, no switch on the wall. Someone had to lift its hand. I told myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had brushed past the arm by accident. Maybe I had touched it without noticing. But deep inside, I knew I hadn't. I had kept my eyes down the whole time. I had avoided that doll like it was poison. I didn't even want to think about how its hand had lifted on its own. I didn't want to think about how it was pointing directly at me, as if it knew I was there, as if it was greeting me in its own way. The next morning, when everyone was awake, I stayed out in the yard as much as I could. I only went back inside to eat or use the bathroom. For the rest of the week, I avoided that room. If I had to pass by it, I walked fast and kept my eyes on the floor. When my aunt came home from work, I could hear her talking on the phone in her room, the lamp glowing through the doorway behind her. I tried not to look. As time passed, I stopped thinking about it every day. But even now, so many years later, when I close my eyes and remember that room, I can still see its pale plastic hand raised up towards me, its eyes fixed on my face with that painted smile. I never told anyone about it. I knew no one would believe me. They would say it was just my imagination, that I was just a scared kid who made up stories. But I know what I saw. Sometimes, when I think about that day, I wonder if the lamp still works the same way. If someone has to hold its hand to turn it on. Or if now, it just turns on by itself whenever it wants to look at someone. The memory of that day has stayed with me all these years, burned into my brain like a scar. It taught me something I can't forget. That even in the middle of a normal afternoon, with sunlight filling the room, there are moments when you feel true fear, and it doesn't matter if you're a child or an adult. It's the kind of fear that crawls under your skin and stays there, quiet, waiting to wake up again whenever you remember. When I think back to that hunting trip, I still get a sick feeling in my chest, like the pressure of fear and disgust is still lodged there after all these years. I was just a kid then, maybe 10 or 11. My dad was always taking us out on hunting trips when deer season came around. He and my uncles and older cousins would load up their rifles, pack the coolers with sandwiches, chips, and sodas, and set out before the sun was even thinking about rising. I never liked the hunting part. I didn't really get it. The idea of killing an animal just to hang its head on a wall or brag about how clean the shot was seemed cruel to me, and I couldn't wrap my head around why it was fun. My dad used to say I was too soft for my own good, but he still took me along. Maybe he hoped I'd grow out of it, or maybe he just didn't want to leave me home alone all weekend. That morning, they drove us down a long dirt trail surrounded by thick trees on both sides. The sun was still hidden, and everything had a dull gray tone to it, making it feel like the world hadn't fully woken up yet. The road was rough, and every pothole made the rifles rattle in the gun rack mounted inside the truck. I remember sitting in the back seat with my backpack in my lap, clutching it tight against my chest every time the tires dipped into a rut. I could hear my uncles in the front talking about where they'd seen tracks the day before and where they planned to post up today. None of that interested me. I was only thinking about how far I'd gotten in Pokemon the night before and whether I'd find a shiny Onix today. When we got to camp, it was still cold enough that I could see my breath. I zipped up my thick camo jacket and pulled on my orange safety vest. My dad handed me a radio and told me I'd be sitting in one of the ground blinds for the morning, keeping an eye out for any deer moving through the brush in front of me. The blind was just a small wooden shack with narrow windows cut into each side. Inside there was an old folding chair and a milk crate someone used as a table. They set me up there because it was safer. No stray bullets coming through at ground level. Plus I wasn't going to be shooting anything, just playing lookout. I settled in quickly, put my backpack on the milk crate, and pulled out my Game Boy. My dad and uncles moved off, their boots crunching the frost-covered grass until I couldn't hear them anymore. It was dead quiet then, except for the occasional chirp of birds waking up in the trees and the rustle of leaves whenever a breeze swept through. I sat there with my knees pulled up, resting the Game Boy on them as I ran around in circles trying to level up my team for the next gym battle. The dull hum of the screen and the click of the buttons became my entire world for a while. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt to be alone, no one telling me what to do, no older cousins teasing me about being soft, just me and my game. But after a couple hours, I got bored. My eyes felt heavy from staring at the little green screen in the dim light, and my back hurt from the cold chair. I turned off the Game Boy and sat there listening to the forest. It was quiet, but not empty. I could hear something walking somewhere far off. Maybe a squirrel, maybe a deer. I didn't really care. I reached into my backpack, rifling through the extra AA batteries, a granola bar, a little flashlight, and a few other games I'd brought. I was trying to find Tetris, thinking maybe something mindless would keep me awake until my dad came back. That was when I heard it. A strange whooshing sound, like a soft rush of air moving fast, coming from behind me. It wasn't loud, but it was so close that it made all the little hairs on my neck stand up straight. I turned around quickly, expecting maybe a bird or a squirrel had landed on the blind. I couldn't see anything out the back window. The whooshing stopped, and everything was silent again. I waited, staring out the window, but nothing moved. Curiosity got the better of me. I stood up and opened the blind's door, stepping out into the chilly air. The sun had come up higher now, making the frost melt in patches across the field and trees. I walked slowly around the blind, feeling my boots sink softly into the muddy grass where the sun had thawed it. As I turned the corner around the back side of the blind, I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't understand what I was looking at. It was like the wall itself was alive. There were thousands of them, all pressed together, interlinked so densely that I couldn't even see the wood underneath. Daddy long legs. The entire back wall of the blind was covered in a solid, moving mass of them. Their thin legs overlapped, tangled, weaving in and out of each other like black threads. Some were standing still, but most were shifting slightly, their tiny bodies pulsing as they crawled over each other in a writhing wave. I felt my stomach twist up tight, and I almost threw up right there. My legs started to tremble so badly that I had to brace my hand against the wall of the blind to keep from falling. The thought of all those tiny legs, the way they moved, the fact that there were so many in one place, it made my skin crawl in a way I didn't even know was possible. I wanted to run, but I had no idea where the camp was from here. I'd been driven out in the dark before sunrise, and I hadn't been paying attention to which way we'd come. All I could think about was getting them away from me, off the blind, out of my sight. That was when I got a stupid idea. In my backpack, I had a can of off bug spray and a little Bic lighter. I don't know what made me think this would be a good idea. Maybe I'd seen it in a movie, or maybe my fear had short-circuited any sense of logic. I pulled them both out and flicked the lighter open. My hands were shaking so badly that it took 3 tries to get the flame to stay lit. I held the lighter out and pressed the nozzle on the off can. A stream of flame burst out, bright orange and hot, lighting up the entire wall of spiders. For a second, I thought I was a genius. The fire ran across them so fast it looked like the whole wall was just one giant torch. But then the wind shifted. I hadn't even thought about the wind. It blew the heat and smoke straight back into my face, making me cough and turn away. That was when it happened. The second the fire touched them, the spiders let go. All at once, the entire mass of them released their grip on the wall. Because the wind was blowing towards me, they flew. They flew at me, thousands of tiny burning spiders, legs flailing in every direction, little glowing embers of them breaking apart midair as the fire consumed them. But some weren't burning fast enough. They hit my jacket, my pants, my hair. I felt their light bodies hit my face, their legs brushing against my skin. Some of them were still alive, crawling even as their bodies burned. It felt like my entire body was covered in them. I could feel them inside my collar, down my back, even in my hair. I don't remember making the decision to scream. It just happened. I screamed so loudly that my throat felt like it was ripping open. I dropped the lighter and bug spray and started slapping at my arms, my chest, my legs. I couldn't get them off fast enough. Every time I brushed one away, I felt 3 more. In a blind panic, I tore off my jacket, then my vest, then my long-sleeved shirt. I kicked off my boots and ripped my pants down, hopping on one leg and nearly falling over. I didn't care about anything but getting them off me. I kept screaming as I pulled off my socks and underwear, standing there completely naked in the mud, slapping at every part of my skin. When I finally stopped, my chest was heaving so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. My entire body was covered in streaks of mud, soot, and tiny red welts where I'd slapped myself raw. I was shaking so badly that my knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the wet ground. I sat there for a long time, hugging my knees to my chest, shivering and crying. The cold mud seeped into my skin, but I didn't care. I felt like my entire body was still crawling with tiny legs, phantom spiders I couldn't shake. I reached out for the radio with trembling hands. My fingers were so cold and numb that I could barely hold the button down. I didn't even care if I was swearing or crying into it. I just told my dad to come get me, that I was done, that I wanted to go home. I sat there naked in the mud, trying not to move, terrified that if I touched any of my clothes the spiders would still be on them. After what felt like forever, I heard the crunch of boots coming through the brush. My dad's shadow fell over me as he stepped around the side of the blind. His eyes widened, but I didn't even look at his face. I just stared straight ahead, tears still falling down my cheeks. He didn't say anything. He just took off his own jacket and draped it over my shoulders. Then he helped me stand up and led me back through the trees to the truck. I didn't hunt again after that. I didn't even want to go into the woods for a long time. My mom tried to get me to go camping the next summer, but I refused. I couldn't even walk barefoot in the grass without thinking about their tiny legs crawling up my ankles. Eventually, my parents took me to a therapist. She helped me talk about what happened, helped me figure out how to be around spiders without completely losing control of myself. Now, years later, I still hate them. Even seeing one makes my chest tighten up and my breath catch. I don't scream anymore. I just back away slowly, keeping my eyes locked on them until they're gone. But deep down, every time I see a spider, I remember that wall. I remember the way they moved together, like one living creature. And I remember how they felt, all of them hitting me at once, tiny burning bodies crawling across my skin. It's something I don't think I'll ever truly forget. I never really believed in all those stories about haunted houses or spirits that kill people. Even after hearing what happened with my grandfather's company, I still find myself thinking about it, trying to come up with a reason that makes sense. But the more I think about it, the more I realize I don't actually know how a person could do what that man did, especially with a machete. I think about it sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, and there's nothing to distract my mind, just staring at the dark ceiling thinking about what those rooms must have looked like after everything was over. My grandfather's company did timber and mining. They'd often set up offices in remote parts of third world countries to oversee new operations. It was cheaper, and the local governments usually didn't care about what happened out there as long as they got their cut. They found a place in a remote part of a country I won't name, somewhere with thick jungle and long stretches of road that turned to mud during monsoon. The house they bought was huge. From the photos I saw, it looked like one of those old colonial homes, with stone walls darkened from rain and moss, wooden windows with shutters that were cracked and rotting, and a balcony on the top floor that faced the trees. There were vines curling up the pillars and across the roof. It was beautiful in a way, but it also looked sad, like something forgotten by time. It was dirt cheap, even for that country, and the local villagers warned my grandfather's team not to buy it. They said everyone who lived there died badly, violently, but he just thought it was superstition. He bought it anyway. They decided to use the lower floor as an office space and the top floor as a place for the guy setting up the office to live. The man was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, had a wife and 3 kids, all under 10. I never met him, but I saw his photos. He looked like a normal man, someone you'd see waiting in line at a bank or sitting with his family at a food court. Nothing about him stood out. He moved there with his wife and kids. They must have packed up their life into boxes and suitcases and traveled across the world to this quiet, humid place surrounded by tall trees and dirt roads. Maybe they thought it would be an adventure. Maybe they thought they'd save money, live cheaply, and come back to their home country after a few years with their savings. Who knows what they thought when they first walked into that old house, carrying tired kids up the creaky wooden stairs, opening windows to let the heavy air out, dusting off counters, and sweeping out dead bugs. At first, everything was fine. He emailed my grandfather every day, sent updates about permits, equipment shipments, setting up electricity and internet for the office. Then suddenly, the emails stopped. My grandfather wasn't too worried at first. Power outages were common there, and sometimes phone signals were gone for days if there was a storm or a tree fell on the wires. Days passed. A week. 2 weeks. Nothing from him. My grandfather tried calling, but the calls wouldn't connect. He thought it was just some issue with the local telecom. 3 weeks later, he contacted the local police to check on the man and his family. The police sent a few men out in a rusted pickup truck. It was a long drive on a muddy road with potholes, so deep you could lose a wheel in them. The men got there in the late afternoon. The house was quiet. They knocked on the door, called out, but no one answered. They looked through the window. One of them vomited on the spot. The news they sent back didn't even sound real. The entire family was dead. The man killed his wife and 3 kids with a machete. Not with a gunshot to the head or pills or anything quick. A machete. He hacked them to death. When the police found them, The bodies were in the bedroom. The bed was pushed up against the door, barricading it shut. His wife and kids were on the bed, hacked apart, and the man was dead on the floor beside them. He had killed himself with the same machete, cutting himself over and over until he died. Not slicing his wrists or neck, but hacking at himself like he was an animal being slaughtered. The blood was everywhere. On the bed, the walls, and even the ceiling. People said the spirits threw the bodies around to get blood up there. But I know blood can spray that high if the cuts are deep and the heart is still pumping. I tried explaining that to someone once, but they just looked at me like I was insane. The bed itself was old and huge, made of heavy dark wood with thick carved posts. The kind you can't move easily, especially alone. Yet the man had pushed it against the door with his dead family lying on it. I kept imagining the sounds it must have made scraping across the wooden floor as he shoved it, the bodies bouncing as he forced it against the door. The locals said this was proof that spirits possessed him, giving him strength beyond human. I don't know. I think about what happens to a person's mind when they're left alone in a place like that, in a quiet house in a remote jungle, with nothing around but thick trees and buzzing insects and dark roads no one drives on after sunset. Maybe the isolation drove him mad. Maybe the heaviness of the air, the silence at night, the distant cries of animals, the knowledge that no one would come if anything happened. Maybe it broke something inside him. People underestimate how easily the mind can slip. My grandfather had to pay off the police to keep it quiet. It wasn't difficult. A few envelopes under the table, and the deaths were listed as natural causes. No one explained how hacking your entire family to death with a machete was natural, but in that country, paperwork didn't need to make sense. He made the employees who knew sign NDAs, threatening them with lawsuits if they spoke. But even though the gory details were hidden, everyone knew the family died. No one wanted to set up the office after that. Even without knowing exactly what happened, they felt it, like some stain that couldn't be washed out. My grandfather tried to find another volunteer. No one came forward. He offered promotions, bonuses, flights back home every few months. Nothing. Finally, he picked a man, gave him a promotion, told him he was in charge of setting up the new office. The man quit the same day. For months, the house sat empty. My grandfather tried to find buyers to sell it off, but no one would buy it, not even for the price of a used car. The villagers avoided it. They wouldn't walk past it at night. They believed spirits lived there. People who drove by on motorcycles would speed up as they approached the house and not look at it, afraid of seeing something standing in the windows. Sometimes I think about that house and the family that moved in thinking it was a new beginning. I think about what their last hours were like, about the man's mind, what he felt as he picked up that machete, what he saw in those dark rooms before he killed his children, then his wife, and finally himself. Did he hear something whispering to him from the shadows? Did he think he was saving them from something worse? Or did he just lose his mind from the heat and loneliness and the knowledge that no one would ever come to help them? Whenever I think about that story, it makes my chest tighten in a way I can't explain. It's not ghosts or spirits that scare me. It's the realization that the human mind is so fragile, that isolation and fear and loneliness can twist someone into a monster, that a normal man with a wife and 3 children can one day decide to kill everything he loves and then kill himself, and leave behind rooms soaked in blood that no one wants to enter again. I've never told this story in full to anyone because it doesn't feel like something that belongs in normal conversation. But sometimes, when I hear people say ghosts aren't real, or haunted houses are just stories, I think about that house and that family. There are no ghosts there, no spirits, no magic machete, just silence, just a dead family in a forgotten place no one wants to remember, just darkness and a quiet so heavy that it feels like it could crush your chest if you stand there long enough listening to it. And that, to me, is far scarier than any ghost story I've ever heard. I remember one summer when I decided to take a trip alone to clear my head. Life had felt heavy. Everything around me felt loud and crowded, and I wanted silence. I had been working every single day for almost a year without a real break, only sleeping, working, and eating in between. My friends told me I looked tired. My boss even said I needed a holiday before I burned out completely. So I packed my old small car with supplies, tent, a folding chair, canned food, rice, oats, tea, and my thick sleeping bag. I brought my hatchet, my folding saw, and 2 knives I always kept sharp. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going, just said I was heading north to camp for a week or two. I liked that idea. No phone signals, no noise, just trees and animals and dirt roads leading deeper and deeper away from humans. I drove for about 4 hours that first day. The roads became smaller, cracked with grass growing in the center line, until finally it turned into a rough gravel path. I kept driving along it, dust flying up behind me like a small storm. I passed old wooden hunting cabins with roofs covered in moss, most of them abandoned, sitting silently under tall pines and birch trees that shook in the breeze. The sun was high, and I felt calm for the first time in months. I stopped to pee once behind my car, looking at the endless rows of trees. I felt free. I continued driving until the gravel road ended at a rusty locked gate with faded paint. I reversed a bit and turned down a side track that wasn't really a road, just 2 thin ruts between tall grass, and slowly drove along it. I felt each stone under my tires. After another half hour, I reached a small clearing. The grass was short here, mixed with sand and fallen pine needles, and it looked like someone had camped there years ago, but no sign of people recently. It felt perfect. I parked my car near the edge, facing outwards in case I needed to leave quickly. I always did that from habit. I stretched, felt my back crack, then set up my small green tent under the shade of 2 large pines. I put down my sleeping bag and foam mat inside. Then I collected dry sticks and branches for a small fire later. I boiled water and made strong tea, sitting in my folding chair staring at the trees. The only sounds were insects, rustling leaves, and a woodpecker hammering somewhere far away. That evening I cooked rice mixed with canned tuna and green beans, adding black pepper until I could smell it in the steam. I ate slowly, breathing the smell of pine sap and smoke. That night I fell asleep before the sun was completely gone, listening to the wind whisper against my tent walls. The next morning I woke up at dawn. The air was cold and my breath came out like fog. I put on my fleece jacket and boiled oats with raisins, eating it while watching the sun rise between the tree trunks. I felt strong, calm, almost empty of worries. I decided to hike further north, deeper into the forest, to find a stream I saw on an old paper map I had brought. I packed a day bag with water bottles, snacks, a compass, my map, and a knife on my belt. I put on my boots, laced them tight, and set off. The trail was narrow and almost invisible in parts. It twisted between rocks and fallen trees covered in gray lichen. Ferns brushed against my legs. Birds flew above me, singing quick, sharp notes. I moved slowly, listening to every sound. I crossed a section where the ground was soft and wet, my boots sinking in black mud up to my ankles. I pulled them out with a sucking noise and kept going. After about 2 hours, I reached the stream. It was clear, about 2 meters wide, flowing gently over smooth stones. I crouched down and washed my face in the freezing water, feeling fully awake and alive. I sat there for a while, eating peanuts and dried apricots, listening to the gurgling of water and the rustle of small creatures in the bushes nearby. After resting, I stood up and looked around. I noticed animal prints along the muddy edge of the stream, probably deer or maybe elk. But there was something else too. Larger prints, rounder, deeper, leading from the water into the trees. I crouched to look closer. Bare prints. Not old either. The edges were sharp and undisturbed by rain or wind. I felt a small tightness in my chest, but stayed calm. I stood slowly and looked around again, listening. The forest felt silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just a heavy silence. I turned and began walking back, this time faster, checking over my shoulder every few steps. I kept my knife in my hand, feeling the rough handle grip against my palm. Halfway back to my camp, I started feeling watched. It was a prickling on the back of my neck, a tightening in my stomach. I stopped and listened but heard nothing except my own breathing. I kept walking. Then I saw a movement to my left between thick bushes. Something large and dark. I couldn't see it clearly, but the bushes moved like something was brushing against them. I didn't run. I knew that was the worst thing to do. I just kept walking, faster now, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. When I reached my clearing, I felt relief wash over me like warm water. I looked around carefully before stepping into the open. Everything was untouched. My tent stood quietly under the pines. My car sat waiting like a loyal animal. I put my bag inside the tent and sat in my chair, trying to calm my breathing. I boiled water for tea again, my hands shaking as I poured. I sat there for hours that day, watching the trees, listening to each sound. I never saw what it was that had followed me, but I felt its eyes on me long after I had returned to camp. That night I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside my tent sounded amplified. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, the high distant cry of a fox, an owl hooting somewhere above me. I kept my knife close to my chest inside my sleeping bag. I kept imagining that bear or whatever large animal it was walking into my camp, sniffing around my tent, clawing at the thin nylon walls. I lay there sweating, heart pounding, until eventually my exhaustion took over and I fell into an uneasy sleep. The next morning I decided to stay near camp. I spent the day collecting more wood, sharpening sticks to make a perimeter around my tent area, tying empty cans to them with paracord so they would rattle if anything brushed against them. It made me feel safer. I cooked rice with beans and sardines for lunch, sitting in my chair with the hatchet on my lap. The air felt heavy and hot. Flies buzzed around my head and sweat dripped down my back. I felt tense, always looking at the tree line. Later that afternoon, I walked a short distance to gather more dry wood. As I crouched to pick up a branch, I heard a noise behind me. Not just a rustle, but a deep cracking sound, like a branch being snapped under heavy weight. I froze completely. My chest tightened, and I felt my pulse in my fingertips. I slowly turned my head, but saw nothing. I waited, not moving a muscle, breathing shallow so I could hear better. Then I heard it again, further to the left this time. Another heavy crunch. Something large was moving just beyond my sight. I stood up slowly, holding my hatchet ready. I didn't move towards it, I just waited. The sound stopped. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, sweating and shaking, staring into the thick green and brown. Finally I backed away, step by step, until I reached my tent clearing. That night I decided not to sleep. I kept my small fire going, feeding it dry sticks to keep the flames alive. I sat in my folding chair with my hatchet and knife on my lap, flashlight between my knees. Hours passed. The stars moved across the black sky. I heard the cans rattle once, just once, around 3 a.m. My heart almost stopped. I shone my flashlight but saw nothing, just moving shadows and the glitter of dew on grass. But something had touched them. I stayed awake until the sky turned gray and birds began singing again. The next morning I made the decision to leave. I felt tired, weak, and on edge. My body felt heavy, my mind foggy from fear and lack of sleep. I packed everything quickly, checking around the clearing every few minutes. I folded my tent, stuffed it into its bag, threw everything into my car without caring about neatness. Before getting in, I stood and looked around one last time. I felt sad to leave. The forest had felt like freedom at first, but now it felt like it wanted me gone, like it was watching me leave. I started the car and drove out of there as fast as the rough ground allowed. The tires bounced over rocks and roots. Dust covered my windows. I drove past the mossy cabins again, past birch trees shaking their pale leaves in the morning breeze. After about 2 hours, I reached paved roads again. I felt my shoulders drop, the tension easing slightly. I drove into a small town, parked near a diner, and sat inside with a cup of black coffee. The noise of people talking, dishes clinking, music playing on an old radio. It felt unreal after all that silence. I never told anyone the full details of what happened out there. People would say I was just scared of a bear, or maybe it was only a deer. But I know what I felt. Something followed me in those woods. Something heavy, silent, intelligent. It didn't attack or come closer, but it watched me. It wanted me to know it was there. And it worked. Even now, years later, sometimes at night when everything is quiet, and I hear a small noise outside my window, my mind goes back to that forest. I see the tree trunks rising tall around me, smell the cold river water, feel the dirt under my boots, and I feel it watching me again from behind the bushes, hidden waiting. That feeling has never really left me, and I don't think it ever will. I woke up that morning feeling tired, even though I had slept early the night before. I didn't know why I felt so drained. I got up from my bed and stretched my arms out, feeling the stiffness in my shoulders. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and looked in the mirror for a few seconds. My hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under my eyes. I brushed my teeth and washed my face properly, hoping I would feel more awake. After getting dressed, I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. As I was sipping it, I stared out the window. The sky was gray, and there was a strong breeze shaking the trees. I could hear the rustling of the leaves, even from inside. I didn't feel like staying home that day. I felt uneasy, like something was pressing down on my chest. I thought maybe a walk would clear my head. So I finished my tea, put on my black hoodie and shoes, grabbed my phone and wallet, and stepped outside. The air was cold. It made me shiver a little, but it also felt fresh. I walked down the street, listening to the sounds around me. Cars passing by, birds chirping, the wind blowing against the street signs. I walked for about 15 minutes until I reached the edge of the small woods near my area. There was a dirt trail leading inside, with bushes and tall grass growing on both sides. I stood there for a minute, just looking at the trees swaying gently. Then I started walking down the path. The further I went in, the quieter it got. I could hear my own footsteps on the dirt and small twigs snapping under my shoes. The smell of damp soil mixed with the scent of pine and grass filled the air. I kept walking slowly, my hands in my pockets, trying to calm my mind. After a while, I came across a small clearing where the ground was covered with fallen leaves. The trees there were spaced out more, and I could see the sky clearly through the branches. I stood there for a while, just breathing in and out, listening to my heartbeat. Then I decided to keep walking deeper into the woods. I had never explored too far in because it was easy to get lost. But that day I didn't care. I just wanted to keep going, to walk until I felt different. I walked for another 20 minutes. The path was thin now, and there were bushes scratching against my legs. I had to step over fallen branches and patches of mud. Soon, I noticed the trees were thicker up ahead, almost like a wall of dark trunks and tangled branches. I hesitated, but then I walked forward anyway. As I moved through that area, I heard a rustling sound to my left. I stopped and looked over. I saw a few bushes shaking slightly, but I couldn't see what was there. Maybe a squirrel or a bird. I kept walking, feeling a little on edge now. The path curved to the right and started going uphill. I walked up slowly, my breathing getting heavier. When I reached the top, I looked down and saw a small dried-up stream bed cutting through the forest floor. There were big rocks and broken branches scattered along it. I decided to climb down into it to check it out. I slid down the dirt side carefully, grabbing onto tree roots so I wouldn't slip. Standing in the stream bed felt strange. The ground was hard and uneven. I walked along it for a while, stepping over rocks, feeling the cold dampness coming from the soil. After walking for about 10 minutes, I started feeling like I wasn't alone. I turned around quickly, but saw nothing behind me. I shook my head, telling myself to stop being paranoid. The stream bed led to another clearing, but this one was smaller and darker. There were large moss-covered rocks on one side and thick bushes on the other. I stood there looking around when I noticed something strange. In the dirt near one of the rocks, there were footprints. They looked fresh. I bent down to look at them. They were boot prints, much bigger than mine. The toes were pointing towards the bushes. I felt my heart rate go up a little. I listened carefully but heard nothing except the wind blowing through the leaves above. I stood up and backed away slowly, feeling goosebumps on my arms. I didn't know why, but something about those footprints made me feel like I needed to leave. I turned around and started walking back the way I came. As I walked through the stream bed, I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see someone following. My steps felt loud in the silence around me. When I finally climbed out of the stream bed and back onto the path, I felt a little relief. But it didn't last. I heard a crack behind me, like a branch snapping underfoot. I froze. My ears were ringing from the sudden rush of blood. I turned my head slightly, trying to listen. I heard another snap, closer this time. I didn't want to look behind me, but I forced myself to. There was nothing there, just the path and the trees. But I knew I heard it. I started walking again, faster now. My breathing was uneven, and I felt sweat on my forehead despite the cold air. After a minute, I heard another sound, like someone exhaling loudly. I stopped again. This time I didn't turn around. I just stood there listening, my body tense. I could feel my heart beating, so hard it almost hurt. I told myself to keep walking, so I started again, moving as fast as I could without running. The path felt longer than before. The trees seemed to close in around me. I could hear my own footsteps echoing in my head. Suddenly I heard fast footsteps behind me, heavy ones, crushing dry leaves and snapping sticks. I started running without looking back. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to keep going. My backpack bounced against my shoulders, and I could hear my breathing, ragged and loud. I didn't know how far I ran, but it felt like forever. The sound behind me stopped for a second, then started again, even faster this time. I ran until I saw the clearing where I had stood earlier. My chest was burning, and my legs were shaking. I kept running, not caring about the bushes scratching my arms or the twigs hitting my face. When I finally saw the edge of the woods ahead, I felt tears in my eyes from relief. I burst out onto the street, stumbling onto the pavement. I turned around quickly and looked back into the trees. There was nothing there, just silent trees and shadows. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone when I pulled it out to check the time. I had been in there for over 2 hours. I walked home as fast as I could, glancing behind me every few steps. When I got home, I locked the door and went straight to the kitchen sink to splash water on my face. My legs felt like they would collapse. I stood there for a long time, breathing hard, staring down at the water going down the drain. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those footprints in the dirt and the heavy footsteps chasing me. I wondered who it was. Maybe it was just some hunter or a hiker, or maybe someone living in the woods. But deep down, I felt like whoever it was had been watching me the whole time, waiting, listening to my footsteps coming closer, and then following me as I walked away, making sure I knew I wasn't alone. In the morning, I woke up feeling sick. My chest felt tight, and my body was sore from running. I made myself some tea and sat by the window again, staring at the trees in the distance. I told myself I would never go back in there alone, no matter what I felt, no matter how restless my mind got. Because I knew now that there was someone in those woods, someone who didn't want to be seen, someone who liked to follow people who wandered too far in. Days passed, but I couldn't get the memory out of my mind. Every time I walked down the street and looked at the tree line, I felt my chest tighten. I started taking different routes to avoid walking near the woods. At night, when I tried to sleep, I kept hearing that sound again in my head. The heavy footsteps on dry leaves, the fast cracking of twigs, the rough exhale like someone out of breath, but still chasing me. Some nights I would wake up sweating, feeling like someone was standing outside my window, watching me sleep. One day, about a week later, I saw a news post online about a missing person. The man had been camping alone in the woods near my area. He had been missing for 4 days, and his family was looking for any information. There was a photo of him wearing hiking boots and a black jacket. I looked at the photo for a long time. The boots looked like the prints I saw near the rock. I felt my stomach twist. The next day, I saw another update. They found his campsite deep in the woods, but there was no sign of him. The tent was torn, and his things were scattered everywhere. Police said it looked like he left in a hurry, but no one knew where he went. As I read that, I felt cold all over my body. I knew he didn't just walk away. I knew he wasn't alone out there. After that, I never went near those woods again. Months passed, and they still never found him. People said he probably got lost or fell and injured himself. But I knew it was something else. I knew that whoever was there that day, the one who chased me, was still out there, hiding behind the trees, waiting for someone else to walk down the wrong path. And every day when I wake up, I think about how close I was to disappearing too. How close I was to never making it back to my home, to my small kitchen, to my window where I sit with my cup of tea, staring at the trees that once felt peaceful, but now only remind me of the heavy footsteps I will never forget. I woke up that morning before the sun was even up. The sky was still dark blue, with only a hint of orange far off on the horizon. I didn't know why I was awake so early, but I felt restless. I lay in my bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the fan above me. It was summer, so the air was thick and warm, but not enough to sweat yet. I kept thinking about the hike I planned for that day. I'd been wanting to hike to this old fire lookout tower for a long time. It wasn't too far, just a few hours up into the mountains from the trailhead, but the idea of going up there alone felt exciting. I liked being alone in nature. No people, no traffic noises, just birds, wind, and my thoughts. I got up, got dressed in my hiking pants and a loose old t-shirt, and made myself some eggs and toast. I packed my small hiking bag with 2 bottles of water, a peanut butter sandwich, a few protein bars, my small first aid kit, and my pocket knife. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I knew it was smarter to tell someone, but I just wanted the freedom of the day to myself without anyone worrying or asking questions. I put on my worn-out hiking shoes, tied them tight, and stepped outside. The air outside felt cooler than inside. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my chest and calm the slight anxiety I always felt before a hike. I drove out of my neighborhood, past the quiet streets where only a few houses had lights on, down the highway, and into the winding mountain roads. As I climbed higher into the hills, the sun started rising behind me, filling the road ahead with long shadows of the trees that lined both sides. Birds were just starting to chirp as the morning woke up. When I reached the trailhead, there were no other cars parked there. I liked that. It meant I had the whole place to myself. I got out, locked my car, and took one last look at the sign that showed the trail route. 5 miles up to the Old Fire Lookout, 5 miles back down. Easy enough. I started walking. The trail was narrow and dusty, with rocks poking out every few feet. Trees grew thick on both sides, mostly pines, filling the air with that sharp, fresh smell. The further I went, the quieter it felt. No highway sounds, just the occasional rustling of squirrels in the bushes or the flutter of a bird flying from one branch to another. I tried to keep my steps steady and quiet. I liked hearing the ground under my feet, the crunch of dry dirt, small pebbles rolling as I stepped over them. About 2 miles in, I stopped to drink some water. My throat felt dry. I took a deep drink, let the water sit in my mouth for a few seconds before swallowing. The breeze was gentle, and I could hear it moving through the needles high above me, like a soft whisper. I felt calm. The sun was higher now, warming my back as I kept walking. I noticed something odd after about 3 miles. The trail curved around a steep slope, and on the uphill side, I saw a small path going off into the trees. It wasn't an official trail. It looked like an animal trail, narrow and partly blocked by bushes. But there were footprints in the dirt leading in. Not boot prints like mine, but bare feet. At first, I thought maybe someone walked barefoot out here for some spiritual reason or something, but it felt strange. Who would walk barefoot here, where the ground was sharp with rocks and sticks? I stood there for a few seconds, staring at those prints. They were small. Not child small, but smaller than my feet. Maybe a woman's feet. They went off the trail and disappeared into the trees. I felt uneasy, but I told myself people do weird things in nature all the time. I kept walking. The last mile to the lookout tower was the hardest. It climbed steeply, with loose rocks making every step careful. My legs burned, but it felt good. I reached the top just before noon. The Fire Lookout Tower was old and abandoned. The wood stairs were half rotted away, so I didn't climb them. I stood at the base, eating my peanut butter sandwich, staring out at the valley below. I could see the tiny line of the highway far off, glinting in the sun. I felt completely alone, like the only person in the whole forest. After I ate, I sat on a flat rock under the shade of a tree, drinking the last of my first water bottle. I rested there for about half an hour, then decided to head back down before the heat got worse. Going down was faster, but it was harder on my knees. I kept a steady pace, trying not to slip on the loose dirt and stones. When I reached that spot where I saw the footprints earlier, I stopped again. I don't even know why I stopped. Maybe I just wanted to look again, to see if they were still there, to see if I imagined them. But they were still there, going off into the trees. I felt this pull in my chest, a strange curiosity that felt mixed with fear. I kept telling myself to just keep going, to ignore it, but my feet started moving towards the prints without me even deciding. I stepped off the trail, pushing through the dry bushes. The ground was rough, and branches scratched my arms as I moved deeper. The footprints were clear at first, pressed into the dry dirt, toes pointed straight ahead. I followed them, feeling my heart beat faster with every step. After about 20 feet, the footprints stopped. Just stopped. There was no sign of them turning around or leaving. They just ended. I stood there looking around. The trees were close together here, their branches making strange shadows on the ground. I felt something then. It was like a chill on the back of my neck. I turned around quickly, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one. I felt the hairs on my arms rise up. I suddenly felt very aware of how quiet it was. No birds, no breeze, nothing. Just my own breathing. I looked at the ground again, trying to find any sign of those footprints continuing, but there was nothing. The dirt beyond that spot was covered in pine needles and small rocks. It was like whoever left those prints just vanished. I felt scared then. My stomach felt tight, and my chest felt heavy. I turned around and started walking back to the main trail as quickly as I could without running. When I reached it, I felt a bit of relief. I looked both ways down the trail, still seeing no one. I started walking again, faster than before. I just wanted to get back to my car. About half a mile from the trailhead, I heard something behind me. It was a rustling sound, like footsteps in the bushes. I stopped, listening hard. It stopped too. I waited, my ears straining to hear anything. I started walking again, and after a few steps, I heard it again. Rustling, crunching, moving when I moved. I stopped again, and it stopped. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my neck. I didn't look back. I just started walking faster, almost jogging now. The sound kept following me, always just out of sight behind me, in the trees. I could feel sweat dripping down my back, even though the air wasn't that hot. My breath felt shallow, like I couldn't get enough air into my lungs. I was almost running now, my shoes slipping on the dirt as I went downhill towards the parking area. When I finally saw my car through the trees, I felt this huge wave of relief. I ran the last few steps to it, unlocked it with shaking hands, and jumped in, slamming the door shut and locking it. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to catch my breath. I looked out the back window, but there was nothing, just empty trees and the trail disappearing into the forest. I started the car and drove away without even taking my shoes off like I normally did after a hike. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone step out onto the road behind me, but I saw no one. As I drove down the winding roads back towards town, I tried to calm myself. I kept telling myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer following me, curious. But my mind kept going back to those bare footprints in the dirt, ending without a trace. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the trail, those footprints, the trees. I lay in bed, listening to every small noise in my house, thinking about how vulnerable I felt out there, alone in the woods, with no one knowing where I was. I thought about how easily something could have happened to me, how no one would have even known where to look. I kept seeing that spot in my mind where the footprints ended, the way the dirt looked undisturbed beyond them, like nothing had ever been there at all. The next day, I woke up feeling exhausted. I decided I wouldn't go hiking alone again for a while. I told myself it was just fear getting the better of me, but deep down, I knew it was something more. That feeling of being watched, of being followed, it wasn't just in my head. I didn't know what it was that left those footprints or what it was that followed me down the trail, but I knew one thing for sure. I never wanted to feel that fear again. That cold, quiet fear that creeps up your back and makes your body feel heavy and light at the same time. From that day on, whenever I go hiking, I tell someone where I'm going. I carry more than I think I need. I look behind me often, because I learned that out there, deep in the trees, anything can happen. And sometimes, you might find something you were never meant to find. Something that was never meant to be seen. But at least I got home. At least I'm still here to think about it, to remember it clearly. I never saw those footprints again, and I never saw who left them. But I think about them all the time. Every time I see a narrow path going off into the woods, I think about that day. I think about how some trails aren't meant to be followed, and some things are better left unknown. That's something I'll never forget. I never really liked driving through the desert at night, but that was the only way I could make it back home before morning. I had driven out early in the day for a meeting at a construction site in another city, and by the time I was heading back, the sun had already started setting behind the low hills. The highway was almost empty, just a few headlights far ahead and far behind me every now and then. The sky slowly turned dark blue, and then pitch black as I passed the last cluster of streetlights near the edge of town. My old Ford truck rumbled along the road, the yellow lines rolling under me in the headlights. The desert stretched out on both sides, flat and empty with small bushes and dark shapes of rocks. I was used to this highway. I had driven it so many times I could almost do it with my eyes closed. But it still made me uneasy at night, knowing there was nothing out there for miles and miles. Just sand, scrub, coyotes, and the cold wind. After about an hour, I felt the tiredness hit me. I had been up since 4 in the morning, and my eyes were burning. I turned the radio on, flipping through static until I found an oldies station. It helped keep me awake for a while, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel, humming along to songs from my dad's time. But eventually, even that wasn't enough. I felt my head start to dip forward, my eyelids so heavy. I slapped myself on the cheek a couple times and sat up straight, but I knew it was getting dangerous. I needed to stop and stretch my legs or splash some water on my face before I crashed into something. There was a small rest stop coming up in a few miles, just a dirt pull-off with a trash can and a concrete picnic table. No lights, no bathrooms, nothing like that. But I didn't care. I just needed to wake up a bit. When I saw the faded sign for it coming up on the right side of the highway, I turned on my indicator and slowed down. My tires crunched off the asphalt onto the dirt lot, and I parked facing out toward the dark desert. I left the engine running and stepped out into the cold night. The wind bit into my sweaty shirt, making me shiver. I stretched my arms over my head, feeling my back pop. I walked away from the truck a bit, just pacing in the gravel to get my blood flowing. My boots crunched softly with each step. The only sound I could hear was the faint whine of the wind through the dry bushes and the tick-tick-tick of my cooling engine behind me. I looked around at the darkness. The sky was full of stars, sharp and clear. The desert was silent and empty, or at least it looked empty. There was a ridge far off to my left, black against the starry sky. It was peaceful in a way, but it also made me feel like I was being watched. I told myself that was just the tiredness making me jumpy. I bent down to scoop some cold water from my bottle onto my face and rubbed my eyes hard. I felt a little more awake. I turned back toward my truck and was about to climb in when I saw something that made me stop. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt next to where I had parked, tracks that weren't there when I pulled in. They curved around the lot and disappeared back onto the highway. That meant someone had come in and left while I was pacing with my back turned to the road. I looked up and down the highway. No headlights in either direction. My chest felt tight for some reason. I told myself it was probably just another driver stopping to stretch like I did, but something felt wrong. I felt exposed standing there under the sky with no cover at all. I quickly got back in the truck, locked the doors, and put my seatbelt on. I sat there for a few seconds, gripping the steering wheel, feeling my heart thumping fast. Finally, I shifted into drive and pulled back onto the highway, trying to shake off the uneasiness. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind me, but the road stayed dark and empty. After about 15 minutes, I started to calm down. The truck hummed along, and the white lines flicked past under me. I was wide awake now, but my mouth felt dry and my hands felt cold on the steering wheel. That was when I saw the lights up ahead. 2 red brake lights glowing on the side of the road, and as I got closer, I saw it was a small SUV parked on the shoulder with the hazard lights blinking. I slowed down a bit as I approached, thinking maybe they had car trouble. As I drove past, I glanced out my window and saw that the driver's door was open. The interior light was on, but I didn't see anyone inside. I kept driving for a few seconds, then felt guilty. What if they needed help? I wasn't the kind of person to just leave someone stranded out here in the middle of the desert at night. I sighed, checking my mirror, and then pulled over onto the shoulder. I put the truck in reverse and backed up slowly until I was next to the SUV again. I left my headlights on so I could see. I didn't want to get out right away, so I just sat there and looked. The SUV looked new, shiny and clean, silver in color. The door was still open, the hazard lights blinking orange into the darkness. I couldn't see anyone around. I rolled down my window halfway and called out, but my voice felt weak in the cold air. There was no answer, just the ticking of the hazard lights and the sound of my engine rumbling. I hesitated, then turned off the engine and took my keys. I didn't want to walk up on someone and scare them, so I made sure to stomp my boots loudly as I got out. I walked up behind the SUV, keeping my hands where anyone could see them. When I got to the open door, I looked inside. There was no one in the driver's seat. The engine was off. The keys were still dangling in the ignition. I looked around at the dark desert, feeling the hairs on my arms stand up. I checked the back seats. Empty. The floor mats were clean, no trash, no bags, nothing. It looked almost too clean. I felt my chest tighten again. Where the hell was the driver? I stood there for a moment, listening hard. The desert was silent except for the clicking hazard lights and the soft wind. My stomach felt heavy like a rock. I was about to turn and go back to my truck when I noticed something. There were footprints in the dust leading away from the SUV, heading off into the desert on the other side of the road. I followed them with my eyes. They crossed the shoulder, then the asphalt, then disappeared into the dirt and scrub beyond. Every part of me told me to leave. This wasn't my problem, but I couldn't stop thinking that maybe someone was hurt out there or lost. I didn't have a flashlight, but I grabbed my phone and turned on the torch. I crossed the road, my boots crunching softly, and started following the prints. They led away in a straight line, not wandering or staggering, just a straight, purposeful line into the dark. I kept my eyes on the ground, lighting up each step. The prints kept going. I walked for maybe 50 feet when I saw something ahead. I raised the light, and my heart started pounding so hard I thought I would throw up. There was a man standing there. He was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, standing perfectly still, facing away from me. His hands were by his sides. He didn't move at all when my light shone on him. I stopped walking. My breath felt trapped in my chest. I wanted to say something, but my throat felt dry. I just stood there, the wind blowing cold against my neck, my phone light shaking in my hand. After what felt like forever, he turned his head slightly, just enough that I could see the side of his face. He didn't say anything. He didn't even really look at me. Then he turned back to face the desert again. I couldn't take it. I turned around and walked back toward the road as fast as I could without running. My legs felt weak, and my skin felt tight all over my body. When I got back to the SUV, I paused for a second, looking back. He was still standing there, not moving, not following me. I hurried back to my truck, got in, locked the doors, and started the engine with shaking hands. I put it in drive and pulled back onto the highway, my tires spinning a bit in the gravel before catching. I didn't look back in the mirrors. I just kept driving, faster than I should have, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. My chest felt like it was caving in. I drove like that for over an hour until I saw the distant glow of my town on the horizon. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a while with the engine off, just listening to the ticking of the metal as it cooled. My hands were still shaking. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about him standing there in the dark, just staring out at nothing. The next morning, I called the State Highway Patrol to report the SUV. They said they would send someone to check it out, and I asked them to call me back to let me know what they found. Later that day, they called and said the SUV was gone when they got there. No sign of anyone. No footprints. No broken glass. Nothing. For days after that, I kept thinking about what I saw. I kept thinking about the fresh tire tracks at the rest stop, about how exposed I felt out there, about the empty SUV and the man standing alone in the desert. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just some strange desert drifter, but deep down I knew there was something wrong about it. Something that made my stomach turn cold every time I thought about it. I still drive that highway sometimes, but I never stop at that rest stop anymore. I make sure I'm well rested before I leave, and if I feel tired, I just open the windows and let the cold air keep me awake until I get home. Because I don't ever want to see something like that again. That man wasn't lost. He wasn't hurt. He was just standing there in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, doing nothing at all. And for me, that's the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. I left work late that day. I stayed back to finish up the reports because I didn't want to deal with them in the morning. When I finally packed up and left, the whole office building was empty except the night security guard at the front desk. I nodded at him while walking out, feeling tired but also calm, because I liked walking home at night when there were fewer people out. The streets looked different in the dark. The shops were closed, their shutters pulled down. Street lights cast long yellow glows onto the sidewalks. Cars drove past with their headlights bright and cold. I felt the breeze on my arms as I walked, and it was quiet except for the sound of engines on the main road a block over. My walk home took about 40 minutes if I didn't rush. I usually took the same route down a main street, then turned into a residential area with smaller houses and older apartment blocks. I liked that route because it was straight, simple, and didn't have too many turns to confuse me. That night, I walked while thinking about what I'd cook for dinner and whether I had clean clothes for tomorrow. My mind was drifting when I noticed someone walking behind me. At first, I didn't pay attention. People walked late all the time. But after 10 minutes, I realized I kept hearing the same footsteps a few meters back. I glanced over my shoulder quickly without stopping. Under a streetlight, I saw a man walking alone. He wore a cap and dark clothes. I couldn't see his face properly. I kept walking, trying not to think too much about it. But after another 5 minutes, I noticed he kept the exact same distance behind me. If I slowed down a little, his footsteps slowed too. If I sped up, his footsteps became faster. My heart started beating harder in my chest. The street was long and empty. I looked around and saw only parked cars and closed shops with iron shutters pulled down. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things, but I knew the difference between a coincidence and someone matching my pace intentionally. I tried to keep calm. I told myself to just walk and turn towards home. I reached the point where I usually turned into the residential area. When I turned, I listened carefully, hoping his footsteps would keep going straight. But they turned too. That's when fear gripped me properly. My arms felt cold, and the back of my neck felt tight. I tried to look calm on the outside, walking as normally as possible, but my mind was racing. I thought about running, but I was scared that if I ran and he chased me, he'd catch up faster. I walked down the quiet residential street. Houses here were mostly dark, a few porch lights on, but I didn't know these people. I didn't want to knock on anyone's door. I kept walking and thinking about what to do. I didn't have pepper spray or anything on me. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't want to pull it out. I didn't want him to see me making a call and get aggressive. The houses thinned out after a few blocks, giving way to a small park with a walking track, then my apartment building a few streets down. As I walked past the park entrance, I heard his footsteps still behind me, same distance, steady. I wanted to cry from fear, but I kept my breathing steady. I walked faster. My footsteps felt heavy on the pavement. The lights along the park fence were dim and flickered in some spots. I didn't dare turn to look at him now. I just kept walking. Then I thought of an idea. There was a petrol station just before my apartment block. It stayed open 24/7. I decided I'd walk straight there instead of going home directly. I didn't want him to know where I lived. I felt a bit relieved having a plan. My legs were tired, but I kept walking fast. I passed the park. My shadow stretched out long in front of me under the streetlights. I reached the main road again. I turned left towards the petrol station. The fluorescent lights glowed white and harsh, and cars were parked there filling fuel. As I reached the entrance, I finally turned to look behind me. He was there. He stopped at the corner, looking at me. I saw his face clearly for the first time under the bright petrol station light. He had a rough, tired face, stubble on his chin, and he wore an old black cap pulled low. He stood there staring at me. I pretended to check my phone, my hands shaking slightly. I walked inside the petrol station shop slowly. The glass doors slid open, and I went straight to the drinks fridge. I grabbed a water bottle I didn't even want, just to look busy. My eyes flicked to the security mirror above the cashier. I saw him standing outside, looking in through the glass, not moving. I went to pay. The cashier was a young man, chewing gum, scrolling on his phone between customers. I paid in cash with shaking hands. I stood there for a few seconds pretending to adjust my wallet, just to buy myself time. Then I walked to the side of the shop and stood next to the coffee machine, pretending to read the instructions on the machine. I watched him through the glass panels. He was still there, standing and looking inside at me. My chest felt tight. I didn't know what he wanted. I kept thinking maybe I was imagining it all, but deep down I knew I wasn't. I stood there for about 15 minutes. My feet hurt from standing. He didn't move. I didn't want to go outside. Then I noticed a police car pull into the petrol station to fill up. My heart leapt in my chest with relief. 2 officers got out. One went inside to pay while the other started filling the car. I walked straight to the officer filling the car, keeping my voice low and calm. I told him there was a man outside who had been following me for blocks. The officer nodded and told me to stay where I was. He gestured to his partner, and the other officer came back out. They walked towards where the man was standing. I watched from near the shop entrance. I saw them talking to him. He put his hands up slightly, like he was explaining something. Then I saw them ask him for something, probably his ID. One officer walked back to their car to check something on the computer. The other stayed with him, watching him carefully. I stayed standing there, gripping my water bottle so tight my knuckles were white. After a few minutes, the officer came back from their car. They talked to the man again, then told him to leave. He said something back to them, shrugged, and turned to walk away down the street. They watched him until he turned the corner and disappeared. Then one of the officers came to me and asked if I felt safe to go home now. I nodded shakily. They offered to drive me, but I said my apartment was just across the road. They waited while I walked to the gate and unlocked it. I glanced back and saw them still standing there, watching me go inside. I felt so relieved I almost cried. When I got inside, I locked my door tight and sat down on my living room floor, feeling my whole body shaking with leftover fear. I sat there for a long time, breathing slowly, calming myself down. I thought about what could have happened if the police hadn't shown up. I thought about what he wanted. Was he just walking home and noticed I was scared, so he matched my pace without thinking? Was he planning to follow me all the way to my building and grab me at the door? Or was he just a lonely man who didn't realize he was scaring someone by walking close behind them for almost an hour? I didn't know. But that night, I learned something important about fear. It's not always about sudden jumps or violent attacks. Sometimes it's in small things stretched out over a long time. The same footsteps behind you, the same shadow following your path, the same figure watching you when you stop. It builds up in your chest like a tight, not until you feel like you can't breathe. That night ended safely because of pure luck that the police pulled in for fuel at the right time. After that, I changed my route home. I started taking the bus instead of walking. Even though I missed those peaceful, quiet walks under the night sky, I didn't want to feel that fear again. I never saw him again after that night. Maybe he was just a harmless man who didn't realize what he was doing, or maybe he was waiting for the perfect chance. I'll never know, but I'll always remember the feeling of his footsteps matching mine in the dark, empty streets, and how fear can grow with every quiet step behind you. I never liked going out at night. Even as a kid, I always felt like the dark was too silent, too empty, and anything could be waiting out there. But when you grow up and start working, you have to do what you have to do. Back then, I was working at a small warehouse about 40 minutes from my apartment. It wasn't a fancy job, but it paid enough to cover my rent and groceries, and that was all I needed. I used to do the late shift, which meant clocking in at 4 p.m. and leaving at midnight or a little after if loading took long. On that night, I remember feeling tired before even leaving for work. My head felt heavy, my eyes burned from lack of sleep. The whole week had been hard. We were short-staffed, and I kept taking extra shifts because I didn't want the manager thinking I was lazy. I remember microwaving leftover rice and eggs around noon, eating half of it, and lying down for a while with my phone buzzing beside me every now and then. When my alarm rang at 2:30 p.m., I felt like I'd just closed my eyes. But I got up anyway, splashed water on my face, brushed my teeth again even though I'd done it earlier, and left in my old silver hatchback. The drive was normal. There was traffic in the beginning, but the closer I got to the industrial area, the emptier the roads became. When I reached work, I just parked, clocked in, and started helping with the boxes. For most of the evening, I didn't think about anything except how my back hurt each time I lifted the heavier crates. By midnight, I just wanted to go home, take off my boots, and lie down. I clocked out, waved at the security guard who sat half asleep near the gate, and walked to my car. I always parked in the far corner because it was easier to leave without waiting for other cars to move. The night was warm but windy. Dust rolled along the ground. I got into the car, turned on the ignition, and let it rumble for a while. The engine made that dry, rattling sound it always made before calming down. I pulled out onto the main road and started the long drive back. The roads were empty. A few trucks passed by, their lights bright enough to blind me for a second each time. I turned on the radio just to keep my mind awake, but there was nothing interesting playing, only slow songs that made my eyes heavier. After about 20 minutes, I turned off the radio and rolled down the window instead. The air smelled like warm dirt and diesel from the trucks. Halfway home, there was this shortcut I always took. It wasn't a real road, more like a long dirt path that connected the industrial road to the highway leading back to my area. It cut off almost 15 minutes of driving, and at that hour, there was no one there to care. During the day, it was used by farm vehicles or sometimes police if they needed to cut through. At night, it was pitch dark because there were no streetlights, only small wooden poles that marked the edges to keep cars from falling into the ditches on both sides. I slowed down as I approached it. My headlights lit up the dusty road ahead. The edges were full of weeds and dry grass taller than my knees. I drove slowly because I didn't want to hit a rock or get stuck in a rut. The car bounced here and there, rattling everything inside, including the half-empty water bottle rolling around near my feet. I was almost halfway across when I saw something ahead on the road. At first, I thought it was just a bush or a pile of garbage dumped there, which happened often. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a pile of garbage. It was a car, parked diagonally across the narrow dirt road, almost blocking the whole path. Its headlights were off, but the shape was clear in my beams. I slowed down to a crawl. My stomach turned a little. Something about a car parked out here, at this hour, felt wrong. I stopped about 20 feet behind it. My headlights lit up the back of the car. It was an old sedan, dark in color, maybe black or dark blue, dusty like it had been driven through these same paths for days. I waited, looking around to see if anyone was coming out. Nothing moved. The windows looked dark. I couldn't even tell if someone was inside. Part of me wanted to reverse and take the long way back. But reversing down this narrow dirt path in the dark wasn't safe either. There were deep ditches on both sides, and if I misjudged even a little, my car would get stuck. I told myself maybe someone broke down and went to get help, or maybe they were sleeping inside. I honked twice, short beeps, just to see if anyone reacted. Nothing. I felt my throat dry up. I didn't want to get out. My mind started thinking of all those news stories where people got robbed, or worse, while stopping to help stranded cars. I turned the steering wheel slightly to see if I could squeeze past it on the side, but the edge of the road dipped down into the ditch too soon. The only way through was to get out and see if I could push it, or at least check if someone was in there who could move it themselves. I took a deep breath, put the car in park, and left the engine running. I didn't want to risk it not starting again in this place. I stepped out and felt the night air hit my face, warm and heavy with dust. The only sounds were crickets in the grass and the soft ticking of my cooling engine. I walked forward, crunching gravel under my boots. My legs felt stiff with tension. When I reached the car, I tried to peek inside through the rear window. It was too dark. I moved to the side window and cupped my hands to block the glare from my headlights. Inside, I could barely make out two front seats and what looked like a jacket or a blanket crumpled up in the passenger seat. I knocked on the window, not too hard. Nothing moved. I knocked again, louder this time, then tried the handle. Locked. I moved to the front of the car. The hood was cold. No warmth, no ticking sounds like my own engine. I walked around to the driver's side and looked in again. The seat was empty. I shivered. The keys weren't in the ignition either. I stepped back, looking around. The road stretched behind me, empty and dark. The fields on both sides were silent. There was no moon that night, only a thin cloud cover glowing with dim city light far away. Something felt wrong. Why would someone leave their car parked sideways like this, completely blocking the road, and not leave any sign or hazard light? I felt my pulse in my throat, hard and fast. My first thought was maybe someone left it here on purpose to block the road and rob whoever came by. My second thought was maybe it was stolen and dumped here. I walked back to my car quickly, each step making dust crunch under my boots louder than it should. I got in and locked the doors. For a few seconds, I just sat there breathing. Then I pulled out my phone to call the police, just to report an abandoned car blocking the road. There was no signal. The screen showed 0 bars, only emergency calls. I cursed under my breath. I didn't want to stay there longer. I shifted into reverse and started backing up slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the side mirrors to avoid the ditches. Every bump made the car sway, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. I reversed for about 30 feet until I found a slightly wider patch of road. I turned the wheel fully and tried to do a 3-point turn. The front of my car dipped slightly off the edge, and my tires spun in the dry dirt, kicking up dust. I panicked and floored it lightly. The wheels grabbed traction, and the car jerked back onto the road. My heart was beating so hard I felt dizzy. I finally turned around and started driving back towards the main road. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights chasing me or someone running after my car in the dark. Nothing. Just my own red tail lights reflecting off the dust. When I reached the paved road again, I didn't stop until I was back on the highway. The empty road felt safer somehow. The whole way home, I couldn't stop thinking about that car. Who left it there? Why park it like that? What if I hadn't stopped in time and hid it in the dark? What if someone had been hiding nearby waiting for me to get out? I reached my apartment a little before 1 a.m. I parked and sat in the car for a while, feeling the sweat dry cold on my back. Finally, I got out and went upstairs. Inside, everything felt quiet and safe. I took off my boots, drank a full glass of water without breathing, and lay down on the bed. I left the lights on for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm down. But my mind kept replaying the image of that car, the way it sat there in the middle of the dirt road, dark and silent. The next day, I woke up late and called in sick. My boss didn't sound happy. but I didn't care. Around noon, I checked the local traffic news online, expecting to see something about a car being found there. But there was nothing. Later in the evening, I drove back to that area, taking the long main roads this time, avoiding the dirt path completely. I stopped by a gas station near the industrial zone and asked the old man who worked there if he heard about a broken car being towed from that dirt shortcut. He shook his head and said he hadn't heard anything. After that day, I never took that dirt road again. Each time I drove by its entrance, I felt my stomach twist up. I kept imagining walking up to that car and finding something worse inside. A body, or someone hiding on the floor waiting. Sometimes, even now, I wonder what the real story was. Maybe it really was just an abandoned car. But each time I think about how it was parked, completely blocking the path in the middle of nowhere, I feel my chest tighten. Since then, I avoid shortcuts at night, even if it means driving an extra hour home. Because the truth is, out there in the dark, you never really know what's waiting. And I'd rather stay alive and tired than brave and missing. That's the clear truth I learned that night. Sometimes it's better to stay on the main road, no matter how long it takes, because not everything you meet in the dark is just a car. I remember waking up that morning feeling tired. I hadn't slept well the night before because the pager had gone off a few times for minor calls. Someone with chest pain, another lift assist at a nursing home. And even though I wasn't on the roster for those calls, I woke up every time it went off. It was around 6:30 a.m. when my phone buzzed on the metal table next to my bed. I reached for it and saw the group text from our search and rescue coordinator. It simply said, "Plane down near Ridgeview Pass. All available SAR meet at station in 30 minutes." I sat there for a few seconds, just staring at the screen. My wife was asleep next to me, curled up under the blanket, and I watched her chest rise and fall softly. I almost didn't want to move. My whole body felt heavy and unwilling, but I swung my feet to the cold floor, pulled on my pants and boots, and grabbed my search and rescue gear bag from the closet. As I zipped it up, my dog lifted her head from her bed by the wall, watching me with those sad brown eyes, tail thumping once against the carpet. I whispered that I'd be back later, even though I wasn't sure how long this would take. The drive to the station was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. The sun wasn't even up yet, just a pale strip of dim gray in the east. The roads were empty. There was fog sitting low over the cattle fields, drifting around old fence posts and rising up into the oak trees that lined the Tulane Highway. I felt like I was driving through a painting, unreal and silent, as if the world was holding its breath. When I pulled into the station lot, there were already 4 other trucks there. I parked next to Josh's pickup and saw him unloading gear. He nodded at me. We didn't say anything to each other. We just walked inside, put our bags down by the staging area, and waited for the others to arrive. The sheriff's deputy came in about 10 minutes later and told us what little information they had so far. Small plane, 3 souls on board, radar contact lost last night just after 9 p.m. No contact since. Likely no survivors, he said, but we needed to go confirm, locate the wreckage, and recover remains for the coroner. He said the words like he'd said them 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. It was his job. It was part of our job too, though most of our calls were for lost hikers, overdue campers, or hunters who'd twisted an ankle in rough country. I'd only ever been on one body recovery before this. It was a suicide. A man who hanged himself from a tree up on Bell Creek Ridge. That had bothered me for weeks. I didn't know how this would feel. We geared up, loaded our packs with rope, webbing, trauma kits, extra radios, GPS units. Someone handed me a thermos of coffee, and I drank it too fast, burning the roof of my mouth, but I didn't care. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was the caffeine, but I knew it wasn't. We loaded into the SAR trucks and convoyed out to Ridgeview Pass. The drive took almost 40 minutes. We drove in silence, staring out the windows at the rolling hills and thick forest below. The sun had started to rise now, but it was hidden behind low, dark clouds, giving everything a flat, gray light. As we got closer, I saw red and blue lights flashing up ahead on a turnout. There were already 2 sheriff's SUVs and a CHP unit there, along with a fire department brush rig. They'd blocked off the turnout and set up a small staging area. When we got out, the air was cold. I zipped up my fleece and put on my SAR vest. The ground was muddy from the night's drizzle, and I could see mist moving through the pine trees across the canyon. Someone had set up an incident command table with maps and radios. The sheriff briefed us again. The plane had impacted on a steep slope about 400 feet below the ridge line. Dense forest. Wreckage scattered. No sign of life. It was an elderly couple and their granddaughter on board. I remember the way he said that part. The granddaughter. He didn't need to say anything else. We all felt it. I looked around at my teammates. I saw Josh staring at the ground, jaw clenched. Sarah, the newest member, was fidgeting with the zipper on her vest. Even Ray, the old Vietnam vet who'd seen just about everything, looked tired and defeated before we even started. The sheriff said we'd need to rappel down to the main impact site. Anyone who wasn't comfortable with body recovery could step aside and help with radio relay or setting up anchor points. About half the team stepped back. I almost did too, but I didn't. I don't really know why. We spent the next hour setting up ropes, anchors, and belay lines. The ground was slick with wet pine needles and mud. Every step sent small rocks skittering down the slope. We could see pieces of the plane through the trees, bits of white fuselage wedged between broken trunks, a bent propeller blade sticking out of the dirt like a buried sword, shredded seats, and twisted metal scattered across the hillside. The smell of fuel was faint but sharp, mixing with the cold, damp forest air. When we finally got down to the impact site, the first thing I saw was the teddy bear. It was pink with little white ears. The fabric was soaked in blood, and it was lying on a patch of moss next to a torn piece of the seat cushion. I don't know why, but seeing that bear hit me harder than anything else. I felt my throat tighten. I had to look away for a moment, staring at the bark of a tree just to steady myself. The bodies were thrown from the plane. We found the grandfather first, lying on his back under a fallen pine branch. His eyes were closed. There was a gash across his forehead. His arms were twisted at unnatural angles. We worked quietly, clearing branches away, so we could cover him with a tarp until the coroner's team arrived to haul him out later. Nobody said a word. We didn't need to. The grandmother was a few feet away, wedged between two large rocks. Her hair was white and streaked with blood. Her legs were pinned under part of the fuselage. We knew she was gone, but we checked anyway. No pulse, no breathing, just cold, broken stillness. We left her covered too, marked the GPS coordinates, and moved down the slope to where the child's body had been reported. She was lying on her side in the dirt. Her blonde hair was matted with blood. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. She couldn't have been older than 5 or 6. There was a scrape on her cheek, and her left arm was bent under her tiny body at a wrong angle. She was wearing a pink sweater with little flowers on it. There was mud on her shoes. I stood there for a long time, just staring at her. I felt empty, completely hollowed out. I thought about my niece, who was the same age, who liked wearing pink sweaters too. I thought about all the times she climbed into my lap to show me a drawing she'd made, or ask if we could go to the park. I thought about how she'd cried last week when she fell off her bike and scraped her knee. How I picked her up and told her it was okay, that she was brave, and she smiled through her tears. This little girl would never cry again. She'd never laugh again, never grow up to ride a bike, or go to prom or graduate college. Her life ended in a split second on this cold, muddy hillside. There was no sound except the wind moving through the pines above us. It felt like the whole world was silent for her. We set up a lowering system to bring her up safely. We treated her body like she was still alive, gentle, careful, respectful. That's what you do. That's what we're trained to do. I remember my hands shaking as I zipped the child-sized body bag around her. I remember how light it felt when we lifted it. It didn't feel right that a person could be that small and light. The climb back up was hard. My legs burned with every step. My shoulders ached from hauling gear and rope all day. But the worst pain was in my chest. It felt like something sharp was lodged under my ribs. When we reached the top, the coroner's van was waiting. We handed off the bags. I watched as they slid the stretcher inside, locked the doors, and drove away slowly down the dirt road. I watched until the red taillights disappeared through the trees. We packed up the ropes in silence. No one said anything on the hike back to the trucks. I could hear my boots squelching in the mud, the rhythmic click of my carabiners against my harness. My knees hurt. My hands were numb from gripping cold metal all day. My face felt stiff, like it had forgotten how to smile. On the drive back, I kept thinking about her, the little girl. I imagined her sitting in the back seat of the plane, holding her teddy bear, looking out the window at the clouds. Maybe she was scared. Maybe her grandparents told her it would be okay. Maybe they thought it would be. I hoped it was quick. I hoped none of them suffered. But I knew from the impact site that hope didn't matter. It just was what it was. Brutal. Final. When I got home, I left my boots by the door. They were caked in mud and pine needles. My dog came over to sniff them and whined softly. My wife was in the kitchen making dinner. She asked me how it went, but I just shook my head and went straight to the shower. I stood under the hot water for a long time, trying to wash off the smell of dirt, fuel, blood, trying to wash away the feeling of death that clung to me. But it didn't work. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Those empty eyes. The pink sweater. The teddy bear soaked in blood. I went out to the living room and sat on the couch in the dark. My dog curled up at my feet, resting her head on my ankle. I sat there until the sun came up, staring out the window at the quiet street, the mailboxes, the cars parked in driveways. Life just kept going, like nothing happened. For weeks after that, I felt numb. I went to work. I went on other SAR calls. I laughed at people's jokes. I mowed the lawn. I paid the bills. But inside, I felt like I was standing alone on that muddy slope, staring at the body of a little girl with no future. One day, I was driving home from work, and I saw a dad walk. I never really thought that night would stick with me for so long. I was only 13, and everything in life felt confusing and embarrassing already. That evening I had gotten my first period. I didn't even tell my mom because I felt so weird and ashamed. I remember sitting in the bathroom for what felt like an hour, just staring at the blood and thinking that something had gone wrong inside me. I eventually stuffed some toilet paper in my underwear and crawled under my blanket, curling up on my side like I always did to sleep. But that night, I couldn't get comfortable. My stomach felt like it was twisting and clenching, and my lower back ached in a dull, annoying way. Every time I turned, it felt like the blood was moving inside me, and that thought made me feel sick. I kept flipping my pillow, trying to find a cold side to calm my feverish cheeks. At some point in the middle of the night, I rolled onto my back. It was so strange because I never slept on my back. I've always been a side sleeper. Even now, all these years later, I still sleep curled up with my knees tucked in and my arms folded under the pillow. But that night, for some reason, I ended up flat on my back with my arms resting beside me like a corpse laid out for viewing. It felt unnatural and heavy, like my whole body was pinned down by its own weight. I drifted into sleep anyway, exhausted from cramping and stress, and started to dream. In the dream, I was sitting in this old chair that used to be in my grandmother's house. It was wooden, with a curved back and thin legs that always felt like they would snap if you rocked too hard. I was sitting in that chair, facing forward in an empty white room, and I started leaning it back on its rear legs. I could feel my chest tighten with that childhood fear of falling backwards, but for some reason I kept leaning. The chair tipped further and further until it reached a point where it shouldn't have balanced anymore. But it didn't tip over or fall to the floor. Instead, it just kept leaning back, almost like I was sinking into something invisible behind me. I remember feeling my stomach drop, that horrible feeling when an elevator goes down too fast, or when you slip on ice. Except this time, the feeling didn't stop. I felt myself falling backwards forever, like there was no ground waiting to catch me. I felt the panic in my chest rising higher and higher until it burned my throat. I couldn't breathe in the dream, and that was when my eyes snapped open. At first, all I saw was darkness. The room was dim, only lit by a tiny sliver of orange glow coming from the streetlight outside my window. My eyes adjusted quickly, and that was when I saw it. Its face was right above mine, so close I could see the faint texture of its thin, white skin. It was like a mask, flat and smooth, but not made of plastic or porcelain. It looked like real skin, stretched tight over bones so thin that the cheeks sunk inward a little. Its face was almost ovular, but slightly stretched upwards to give it an even more unnatural look. Two big, black, glassy eyes stared directly into mine, reflecting what little light there was in the room. They weren't bulging or cartoonish, but perfectly smooth like polished river stones. Above them, its eyebrows were arched so far up its forehead that they almost touched its hood, giving it an expression of pure rage or hunger. Its mouth was small and thin, with quivering lips pressed together so hard that they almost disappeared completely. It didn't have a nose, just two small holes where a nose should be. The worst part wasn't how it looked. It was what I felt pouring out of it. There was a hate radiating from this thing that I had never felt before in my life. Not just hate, but an overwhelming desire to destroy me. To rip something out of me that wasn't just flesh and blood. It was like it wanted to eat the part of me that made me who I was. My thoughts, my memories, my life. I felt it sink into my chest like a cold, hard stone. My heart pounded so loud that it filled my ears, drowning out the quiet hum of the streetlight outside. I tried to move, to roll away, to scream, to lift my hand and push it away from me, but nothing happened. My entire body was frozen, like it had poured concrete into my veins. I tried to suck in a breath, but my lungs felt stuck. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes and sliding sideways towards my ears, but even blinking felt impossible. I wanted to close my eyes so badly, to shut out that terrifying face, but it felt like my eyelids were glued open. Its eyes bore into mine, unblinking, wide and black and endless. I felt like it was looking through me and into something deeper, searching for something it wanted to tear out with its thin, quivering lips. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only a minute, I managed to let out a small whimper. It was the tiniest sound, like a puppy whining in its sleep. The moment that noise escaped me, its body snapped back upright. It stood straight at the foot of my bed, towering above me. I could see it fully now. It was tall, almost as tall as my ceiling. Its thin black cloak draped all the way to the floor, covering everything except that horrible face. Its arms were hidden inside its sleeves, and it didn't move them at all. It just stood there, staring at me with those hateful eyes, and started pacing back and forth at the foot of my bed. I could see the frustration in the way it moved. It stalked from left to right and back again, its head never turning, its eyes never leaving mine. It was like there was an invisible glass wall around my bed, and it wanted so desperately to break through it but couldn't. Every time it stepped closer, it would stop abruptly and shiver with rage. I could almost hear its teeth grinding even though its mouth never opened. It paced like that for a long time, each step slow and deliberate, each turn sharp and angry. I sat up in bed, my body still frozen with fear. My blankets were soaked with sweat, and I could feel the dampness clinging to my skin. I couldn't take my eyes off it, even though every instinct screamed at me to look away. Behind it, my closet door was cracked open a few inches. The dark gap between the door and the frame felt like it was pulsing with something heavy and suffocating. Then, in one smooth motion, it turned and slid into the closet. Its long, thin body bent slightly to fit through the narrow opening. But it didn't disappear completely. Its face stayed visible in the crack, staring out at me with those wide, unblinking eyes. Even though its body was hidden, I could still feel its hate pouring out like boiling water, flooding the room with a feeling so intense that it made my chest ache. It stayed like that, half hidden, half visible, its face quivering with anger and frustration as it watched me. And then slowly it started to fade. The white of its face blended with the darkness behind it until all I could see was the deep black of my closet. I sat there in bed for a long time, staring at the crack in the door. My hands were shaking so hard that I couldn't even grip my blanket to pull it up around me. I felt my bladder aching, but I couldn't force myself to move. I was too scared to even blink, afraid that if I closed my eyes, it would be hovering over me again when I opened them. After what felt like an eternity, I finally reached over and turned on my lamp. The warm yellow light filled the room, but it didn't chase away the feeling that it was still there, hiding just out of sight. Watching, waiting. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat up on my bed with the lamp on, staring at the closet door until my eyes burned and my vision blurred. When the sun finally started to rise, I got up and walked out of my room without looking back. I sat on the living room couch with all the lights on and stared at the blank TV screen until my mom woke up for work. I didn't tell her what happened. I didn't tell anyone. I just sat there all day, numb and empty, feeling like something inside me had been scooped out and thrown away. For a long time, I told myself it was sleep paralysis. I read stories online about people seeing demons or ghosts or shadow men while frozen in their beds. I convinced myself that it was all just a hallucination brought on by stress and hormones and exhaustion. It was easier to believe that than to think it was real. I left my lamp on every night after that, and I never slept with my closet door open again. Even now, as an adult, I always make sure it's closed tight before I go to bed. The feeling of it staring at me through the crack still makes my stomach twist into knots. Years later, I became friends with a girl from work. We were sitting in her living room one night, talking about scary stories. She was quiet for a while. Then she told me about something that happened to her when she was a teenager. She said she was up late at night with her door open, and she saw something standing out in her living room by the kitchen. She said it was tall and thin, wearing a black cloak, and it was beckoning her to come closer. When she looked away and then looked back, it was still there. She said it had a flat, white face with big black eyes, thin lips, and no nose. As she described it, I felt every hair on my body stand on end. My hands started shaking, and I could feel tears building up behind my eyes. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed a sketchbook from her coffee table and handed it to her. She drew what she saw, slowly, carefully, her hand trembling with each line. When she was done, she handed it to me, and I felt my chest seize up so hard it hurt to breathe. It was exactly the same face I had seen all those years ago. The same flat white skin, the same black eyes, the same thin, angry lips. She had never heard my story. I had never told anyone. But there it was, staring back at me from the page. We never spoke about it again after that night. It felt like acknowledging it made it more real, like saying its name out loud would bring it back. But even now, sometimes when I'm lying in bed in the dark, I think about it. I think about how it looked at me with that hate, how it wanted something from me that it couldn't take, how it slipped into the closet and waited there, watching me from the shadows. And I wonder if one day it will find a way to reach through that invisible barrier. If one day... I still remember that day like it happened just yesterday, even though it's been over 20 years since I graduated from nursing school. I've seen a lot since then, people coming into the hospital laughing and leaving in tears, people coming in barely hanging on and walking out days later, surprising everyone. But that day remains clear in my mind, like it's frozen there. It was a normal shift at first. The morning was quiet, and I spent most of it checking on my assigned patients, making sure everyone was clean, comfortable, and that their charts were up to date. We had a lot of elderly patients in that unit. Many of them had been there for weeks, waiting for placement into nursing homes or waiting to get stable enough to go back to their families. Some of them never got better. That was part of the job I was still getting used to back then, knowing that sometimes all we could do was make people comfortable until their time came. It felt heavy, but I kept telling myself that at least they weren't alone. That day, I had a patient who was an older lady, probably in her early 70s. She had been there for a while. I had read through her chart when I first got assigned to her care. I saw she had advanced heart failure and a number of other health problems, including diabetes and kidney failure. But what stood out to me was her code status. She was a DNR, do not resuscitate. That meant if her heart stopped or she stopped breathing, we were not supposed to do CPR or intubate her or anything like that. We would let her go peacefully. When I first met her, I noticed she looked tired. There was something in her eyes that told me she was ready to go. She barely spoke, but when she did, she asked for small comforts, a sip of water, an extra blanket, the lights dimmed so she could sleep. I always made sure she was clean and comfortable. In the back of my mind, I felt like I was caring for my own grandmother. That's how I tried to treat every patient. That morning, while I was changing her sheets and giving her a bed bath, I looked at her face. Her eyes were half closed, and her breathing was shallow but steady. I remember thinking how fragile she looked, how thin her arms were as I lifted them to wash underneath. Her skin was cool but not cold, and her pulse was weak but regular. She didn't speak at all while I cleaned her, but she opened her eyes for a second and looked at me. There was no fear in her eyes, only calmness, almost relief. Later in the afternoon, around 2 o'clock, her family came in. She had 2 adult children, a son and a daughter. They were both in their 40s, dressed well, holding cups of coffee as they walked in. I had seen them before. They didn't come every day, but they came often enough. I remember thinking they looked tired too. They stood at her bedside, looking down at her small frame under the white blanket. She didn't open her eyes or move when they talked to her. She just lay there, breathing slowly, her chest rising and falling under the sheets. I stayed in the room for a bit, checking her vitals. I could hear them talking softly to each other, something about her house and insurance. I wasn't really listening. I was focused on her blood pressure, which was low, and her oxygen, which was borderline. After a few minutes, I left the room to continue with my other patients. When I came back about half an hour later to check on her again, they were gone. It was around 3:30 when I heard the charge nurse call my name. She told me to come to the nurse's station. When I got there, I saw the two children talking to the doctor on call and our nurse manager. They looked tense, but not sad or crying. More like they were arguing. I stood a little distance away, not wanting to intrude, but close enough that I could hear bits of their conversation. They were talking about her code status. I heard the daughter say, "She doesn't know what she wants anymore. She's not thinking straight." The son nodded and added, "We want her to be full code. We can't let her go like this. She's not in her right mind. We have power of attorney." My heart sank a little when I heard that. I didn't know all the legalities back then, but I knew what it meant when someone had power of attorney. It meant they could make medical decisions for her if she was considered unable to decide for herself. I felt uneasy hearing them talk about it like that. I remembered her eyes from that morning, how calm she looked, like she had accepted whatever was coming. I didn't think she wanted to be saved, but it wasn't my place to say anything. I was just a student nurse back then, trying to do my best and follow orders. The nurse manager nodded to them and said she would update her status right away. I saw her go to the computer and change the code status from DNR to full code. That meant if her heart stopped, we had to do everything we could to bring her back. Chest compressions, defibrillation, breathing tube, everything. For the rest of the afternoon, I kept checking on her. Her breathing got slower, and her pulse was getting weaker. She didn't open her eyes anymore. I kept thinking about what would happen if she coded. I had done CPR on mannequins in school, but not on a real person. The thought of doing it on her made my chest feel heavy. Her body was so small and fragile. I knew how violent chest compressions could be, even when done properly. Around 6 o'clock, right as the evening shift was coming in, I heard the alarm from her room. I ran in and saw her lying there, not breathing. Her lips were already turning blue. I checked her pulse. There was nothing. My hand started to shake a little, but I called out to the hallway for help. Within seconds, the code team was running into the room. The respiratory therapist rolled in with the crash cart. The doctor came in, quickly putting on gloves. The charge nurse started chest compressions while I stood to the side, trying to stay out of the way, but ready to help if they needed me. I could hear the sound of her ribs cracking under the compressions. It always sounded awful, but it meant the compressions were deep enough to move blood. Still, I felt sick hearing it. The doctor got the defibrillator ready. Her heart was in ventricular fibrillation, a deadly rhythm where the heart quivers uselessly instead of pumping blood. The only way to fix it was to shock her. The doctor called out to clear the bed and pressed the button to deliver the shock. Nothing happened. The machine beeped, but there was no jolt. He checked the wires, checked the pads on her chest, pressed it again. Still nothing. I could see sweat on his forehead as he tried a third time. The chest compressions continued non-stop. Her small body was being pushed down into the mattress with each thrust. Her arms flopped slightly with each compression, lifeless. The doctor looked at the machine, pressing buttons, checking everything again. He told the nurse to get another defibrillator from the room down the hall. They wheeled it in quickly. They set it up, placed the pads, and tried again. Nothing. The machine wouldn't deliver the shock. The screen showed her heart was still in VFib, but the button didn't work. The doctor's hands were shaking as he pressed it again and again. I remember staring at her face. It was so calm, even with all this happening. Her mouth hung slightly open, eyes closed. Her thin gray hair was spread out on the pillow. Even with all the chaos around her, she looked peaceful, like she wasn't even there anymore. The compressions went on for minutes. The doctor kept trying to shock her, switching machines, checking wires, calling out for troubleshooting. It felt like forever, but probably it was only 8 or 10 minutes. The whole time, the defibrillator refused to work. It wasn't just one machine, 2 machines refused. I remember looking at the respiratory therapist's face. His eyes were wide, and his mouth was slightly open in disbelief. We had never seen anything like that before. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor checked her pulse again. Nothing. He looked at the monitor. Still VFib. He pressed the shock button one last time out of desperation. Nothing. Then he looked at the clock and called time of death. Everyone stepped back from the bed. The compression stopped. The room fell silent except for the flatline tone from the monitor. The doctor turned away and took off his gloves, tossing them into the bin. The charge nurse turned off the alarm. The respiratory therapist disconnected the oxygen. I just stood there, staring at her face. Then, as we were cleaning up and getting ready to prepare her body, the doctor pressed the shock button one last time before powering off the defibrillator. This time, it delivered a shock instantly. The machine lit up, beeped, and delivered the jolt without hesitation. But by then, she was long gone. No one said anything for a moment. We all just looked at each other. I could feel a chill run down my arms. The hairs on my neck stood up. The doctor shook his head slowly, his eyes tired and sad. He told us to finish preparing her body and left the room quietly. Afterwards, the hospital checked both defibrillators. They checked the logs, tested the machines again and again. Both of them worked perfectly fine. There was no malfunction recorded in their memory, no reason they shouldn't have worked during that code. The biomedical engineer even came to talk to us about it later that week. He said it was impossible for both machines to fail like that. They had never seen it before. But I knew what I saw. I knew we did everything right. Everyone on that code team knew we did everything we could. Still, she didn't come back. In the end, she got what she wanted. Her children might have changed her code status, but in the end, her body, her heart, refused to come back. The machines refused to bring her back. It was like her final choice was stronger than anything we could do. That day changed the way I saw my work. I realized that sometimes, no matter how advanced our technology is, no matter how hard we try, there are things we cannot control. Life has its own way of ending. Sometimes the body knows when it's time, and nothing we do can change that. I think about her sometimes, especially when I'm caring for other patients who are nearing the end of their lives. I remember her calm face and the feeling in the room when the machines failed. It wasn't scary like a horror movie. When I was in elementary school, I remember how excited my parents were when they decided to add on to our house. We lived in this old colonial home that looked like something from a history book. The floors were made of soft wood, and everything was painted the way it would have been 200 years ago. My parents always talked about keeping it historically correct, like it was some sort of museum piece, not just a place where we lived. I didn't care about any of that back then. To me, it was just home. The creaky floors, the cold walls in winter, the smell of old wood in every room, that was normal to me. My parents hired an architect and a contractor. At first, it felt fun to have people coming in and out of the house. The men would be carrying big boards, making loud noises with saws and drills, shouting back and forth about measurements and nails. I would sit in my room doing my homework and hear all of it through the walls. It felt like the house was alive. But after a while, it wasn't fun anymore. The work just never ended. My mom would always come home from errands angry about how slow everything was going. My dad would stand outside with his hands on his hips, staring at the unfinished frame of the new addition, shaking his head. I remember overhearing them fighting about the wood trim. My dad said he didn't care what the contractor thought. He wanted it painted to match the rest of the house. The contractor said it was a waste of time because it was good quality wood and shouldn't be covered. They argued about that for months. The contractor kept getting paid, even though barely anything was done. The addition sat there, half finished, looking like an exposed skeleton attached to our old house. When the wind blew hard enough, the tarps over the roof would flap so loud it sounded like thunder. After about a year of this, my parents fired that contractor. They said he was a scammer and that he was never allowed near our house again. My dad was furious. My mom cried in the kitchen the day she wrote the last check to him. She said it felt like paying a thief. That was when they hired another contractor. This new one was someone our lawyer from church knew. He said this man was trustworthy and had a good team. The workers started coming almost every day. They worked hard, sweating under the hot, humid sun. The kind of heat that makes your shirt stick to your back before you've even walked out the door. My mom always felt bad for them. She would make lemonade and iced tea and send me out with trays of drinks and cookies. I think she wanted to teach me kindness. I would carry the tray out, careful not to spill, feeling their eyes on me as I walked up. Most of them would smile and thank me. Their hands were always rough and dirty when they took the glasses from me. I remember the way their fingernails were always black with dirt and grease. Their shirts were soaked through with sweat. Some of them smelled like cigarette smoke and metal. I never minded it. I thought they were just regular men working hard in the sun. I felt proud giving them their drinks. They would pat me on the head sometimes or say I was sweet. That made me feel happy. I was just a kid who liked being told I was good. There was one man I remember clearly. His name was Kenny. He wasn't very big, but he was stronger than he looked. He had pale skin that burned red in the sun and thin brown hair that stuck out from under his hat in greasy strings. His eyes were small and light blue, like the sky when it's too bright to look at. He always had dirt on his face. Sometimes he would wipe his forehead with the back of his hand and leave a streak of mud across it. He was always friendly to me. He would ask how my day at school was and what I liked to do for fun. I would tell him about the books I was reading or the games I played at recess. He would listen and nod and tell me I was smart. I liked him because he seemed like he actually listened. The other men were always busy measuring or carrying things, but Kenny would take the time to ask me questions. I didn't know it at the time, but the actual contractor never showed up to the job site. Kenny was the one in charge most days. He would stand there holding the plans, telling the other men what to do. I thought he was important. I thought he was like a teacher for them. The addition took forever to finish. I grew taller in that time. My brother went from being a small middle schooler to a tall, awkward teenager with a deeper voice. I went from playing with dolls to reading chapter books and writing stories for class. The addition was just always there, half finished, slowly becoming part of the house. My parents left us home alone with the workers many times. It never felt weird back then. They would tell us to stay inside and not bother the men too much. Sometimes I would sneak outside anyway just to watch them hammering or pouring cement. I liked the smell of fresh wood and wet concrete. It smelled like something new being born. Then one day it was done. We had a whole new part of our house. My mom walked around wiping her eyes with a tissue, saying how beautiful it was. My dad clapped Kenny on the back and told him he did a good job. Kenny smiled with his small, pale lips and told my dad it was no problem. He was wearing a dirty white shirt and jeans with holes in the knees. I remember the way his arms were so thin when he wiped his hands on his pants. His veins popped out blue under his skin. A few months later, life felt normal again. There were no more trucks parked outside. No more banging or sawing or shouting. Just quiet mornings with the birds outside the window and the smell of my mom's coffee in the kitchen. I was eating cereal before school when my dad came into the kitchen holding the newspaper. His face was pale, like he was sick. He sat down without saying anything, just staring at the paper. My mom asked what was wrong, but he didn't answer at first. He just kept staring. Then he folded the paper and pushed it across the table towards her. She picked it up and started reading. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she made a little sound, like a squeak. I didn't understand what was happening. Later that day, I heard them talking in their room. They were trying to whisper, but I could hear every word through the thin walls. They were talking about Kenny. He had been arrested. Something about children. I didn't understand all the words they used. I just heard pedophilia and sex offender list and prison. I didn't know what those words meant, but I knew they were bad because of the way my mom sounded like she was going to cry and my dad sounded like he was going to break something. I went back to my room and sat on my bed for a long time. I tried to remember every time Kenny had ever talked to me. Every time he asked what games I played or what books I liked. Every time he smiled at me. I remembered how he would put his hand on my shoulder sometimes or pat my back when I brought him lemonade. I remembered once when he told me I was growing up so fast. At the time, it felt nice to be told that. Now, sitting there on my bed with the late morning sun coming through my window, it felt like a cold hand on my neck. My parents never talked to me about it. They just told me to stay away from strangers, even people who seemed nice. I don't think they ever forgave themselves for letting me and my brother stay home alone with the workers there. For weeks after they found out about Kenny, my mom kept locking every door and window twice, even during the day. She would watch out the window every time a car drove by, like she was waiting for something bad to happen. I started having trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kenny's face. His pale lips, his thin arms, his small blue eyes squinting at me like he was looking straight through me. I would pull the blankets up over my head, trying to hide from the memory of him. I didn't feel safe in my own house anymore. The house that was supposed to be home felt like a place where something rotten had been buried in the walls. I would sit in the new addition sometimes, looking around at the clean paint and smooth floors, and feel sick to my stomach. It felt like his shadow was still there, stuck in the wood and drywall, like he was still watching. School didn't feel safe either. I started seeing bad people everywhere. I didn't like talking to my teachers alone. I stopped going to the library by myself because the librarian was an old man and I didn't trust him anymore. I didn't trust any grown man. Even the men at church started to feel scary to me. I didn't like the way they smiled or patted my head. It felt like they were lying. I felt like everyone was lying. As I got older, I learned what those words meant. I learned what Kenny had done to other children before he ever stepped foot on our property. I learned he had been on a list that people could look up if they wanted to. But no one did. The contractor who hired him knew and didn't care. He thought it didn't matter to tell my parents. I think that's what makes me feel sickest of all. Someone knew and decided it wasn't important enough to protect us. We were just kids, small and helpless, trusting everyone around us. We were nothing to them. Years later, when I go home to visit, I still walk through that addition. It's just part of the house now. My parents put up family pictures on the walls. My mom keeps a vase of fresh flowers on the windowsill. It looks like any other room, but to me it still feels wrong. I still see Kenny's thin arms holding up a board, his small eyes squinting at me under the bright sun. I still hear his voice in my head telling me I was smart, that I was growing up so fast. Sometimes at night, when I wake up in the dark and my heart is beating too hard, I think about how close I was to something terrible happening. How he was right there, in my house, looking at me with those pale blue eyes. I think about how my parents would leave for errands, trusting the workers to keep an eye on me and my brother. I think about how lucky I am that nothing happened. But then I feel guilty for feeling lucky, because somewhere, there was a kid who wasn't lucky. Somewhere, there was a kid who brought him lemonade, and it didn't end with a smile and a pat on the back. That's what stays with me the most. Not the fear, not the nightmares, not the disgust. It's the guilt. The guilt that he smiled at me, that he touched my shoulder, that he told me I was growing up fast, and nothing happened. But it could have. I woke up around 5 in the morning because I couldn't sleep anymore. I had been tossing and turning all night on my thin camping mat. My back hurt from lying on the uneven ground, and I felt cold even though I had zipped my sleeping bag all the way up to my chin. I could hear the birds starting their morning songs outside, that slow buildup of chirping and rustling that starts before the sun fully rises. The air inside the tent smelled like damp earth and nylon. I could hear my friend breathing softly next to me, still asleep, bundled in his sleeping bag with his face hidden. I lay there for a while, just listening and staring at the green fabric above me, thinking about getting up. Finally, I decided I would rather be outside than lying there feeling stiff and cold. I unzipped my sleeping bag as quietly as I could and reached for my hoodie, which felt freezing against my skin. I slipped on my shoes, unzipped the tent door slowly, so the zipper didn't wake my friend, and stepped out into the early morning air. The campsite was quiet and still. The sky was pale gray with a hint of pink at the edge. I stood there breathing in the fresh air for a minute. Everything felt peaceful. The dying campfire from the night before was nothing but ash and a few blackened chunks of wood. The grass under my shoes felt wet with dew. I could see our 2 backpacks leaned against the picnic table, some mugs, and our food cooler sitting by the bench. I stretched my arms over my head, trying to loosen the tightness in my shoulders. I felt hungry, but not enough to open the cooler. I decided to take a small walk to warm myself up. I grabbed my flashlight just in case, though there was enough light to see where I stepped. I walked along the trail that led away from our campsite, deeper into the forest. The path was just packed dirt, scattered with fallen pine needles and leaves. As I walked, I could hear the crunch under my shoes, the squeak of damp leaves. I saw a rabbit dart across the path ahead of me, its small white tail bouncing before it disappeared into the bushes. My breath formed small clouds in front of my face. I kept walking, feeling the cold seep through my shoes, but I liked the quiet and the solitude. After about 15 minutes, I stopped walking. I was deep enough in that I could no longer see any sign of the campsite. Around me were tall, thin pine trees, their trunks straight and dark, their tops swaying gently in the morning breeze. The forest floor was covered in fallen branches, dead pine needles, and small patches of moss. I looked around, feeling calm. But as I turned to head back, I heard a sound that froze me in place. It was a snapping sound, like a branch breaking underfoot. It was faint, but clear in the silence of the woods. I stood there completely still, listening. Another snap came from somewhere to my left, deeper in the trees. I tried to see where it was coming from, but the trunks were too close together, and the early light didn't reach far in that direction. My first thought was that it was a deer moving through the forest, stepping on fallen branches. But something felt off. The snaps were too slow and deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was moving was being careful. I strained my ears, holding my breath. I heard another faint noise, this time like a scuff against bark. My heart started beating faster. I felt sweat start to form under my arms despite the cold. I stood there for another minute, then forced myself to turn and start walking back towards the campsite. I didn't run. I didn't want to make noise or draw attention to myself if there was an animal out there. I kept my steps slow but steady, my ears tuned to every sound. I could hear birds above me, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and my own breathing coming out shaky. I reached the part of the trail where I could see the clearing ahead. My shoulders relaxed a little. I could see the shape of our tent, the picnic table, and the empty fire pit. But just before I stepped back into the clearing, I heard another noise behind me, closer this time, like a foot scraping against the dirt path. I stopped. I turned my head slightly to listen better. Nothing. The forest was silent again. I swallowed hard and forced myself to keep walking. When I reached the campsite, I went straight to the tent and crawled back inside. My friend was still asleep. I lay down on my mat, pulled the sleeping bag up to my chin, and stared at the roof of the tent. My heart was still racing. I tried to convince myself it was just a deer or a coyote passing through the woods, but my mind kept going back to how careful the steps had sounded, how slow and deliberate. I lay there until my friend woke up an hour later. He sat up, rubbing his eyes and yawning. The sun was fully up now, bright golden light streaming through the tent fabric, warming it slightly. He started rummaging around for his phone to check the time. I stayed quiet, just staring at my hands, which were trembling slightly. We got up, made some coffee, and ate breakfast by the picnic table. He was talking about our plan for the day, about hiking to the waterfall we had marked on the map. I nodded along, trying to focus, but my mind kept going back to that sound in the woods. After breakfast, we packed a small bag with snacks and water and set off on the trail that led to the waterfall. The path twisted through the trees, sometimes climbing over rocks and roots. The sun filtered down in beams, lighting up floating bits of pollen and dust. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the forest behind us. Every time I heard a bird fly away or a branch drop somewhere, my heart jumped into my throat. We walked for almost an hour before we reached the waterfall. It wasn't huge, just a narrow stream falling over a rocky ledge, splashing into a shallow pool below. The rocks were covered in bright green moss. My friend climbed down to the edge of the pool to dip his hands in the water. I stayed on the rocks above, looking out into the trees. I felt like something was watching us. I couldn't shake the feeling. The hairs on my neck were standing up. My chest felt tight, and my stomach felt hollow, like it was eating itself. My friend splashed his face with the cold water and laughed at how refreshing it felt. I tried to smile back, but I couldn't. We spent about half an hour there. He took some photos with his phone, the water falling behind him. I sat on a rock, hugging my knees, feeling the cold from the stone seep into my jeans. Finally, he said we should start heading back, so we could make lunch at camp. I was glad to leave. As we walked back along the trail, I kept looking behind us. The trees all looked the same, their trunks lined up like soldiers, dark and unmoving. But every now and then I thought I saw something dark between them, something moving quickly and silently from one tree to another. I blinked and it was gone. My mouth felt dry. I kept swallowing, trying to keep calm. When we reached the campsite again, I felt a small sense of relief, but it didn't last long. We ate sandwiches at the picnic table. My friend lay down on the grass afterwards, using his backpack as a pillow, and closed his eyes to nap in the sun. I sat there staring into the forest. I kept thinking about those footsteps, how quiet they had been, how they had seemed to follow me back to camp. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to scare my friend or ruin the trip, but I couldn't ignore what I felt. In the afternoon, he woke up and suggested we collect more firewood for the evening. We grabbed our small hatchet and headed into the forest near camp. We walked around looking for dry fallen branches. I tried to focus on gathering wood, bending to pick up sticks and dragging thicker branches out from under the trees. But every time I straightened up, I scanned the forest around us, expecting to see someone standing there watching us. I felt like I was being hunted, like I was prey. At one point, while dragging a long dry branch out from under a bush, I noticed something strange on the ground. It was a boot print, fresh and clear in the damp dirt. My chest tightened when I saw it. It wasn't my print or my friend's. We both wore sneakers. This was a heavy boot print, with a thick tread, larger than either of our feet. I stared at it for a long time, my hands gripping the branch so hard my knuckles turned white. I felt dizzy for a moment. I looked around but didn't see anyone. The forest was silent, except for the sound of my friend chopping at a fallen log a few feet away. I didn't tell him about the print. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid he would brush it off and I would feel stupid, or maybe I was afraid of making it real by saying it out loud. We finished gathering wood and carried it back to camp in bundles tied with paracord. As the sun started setting, I tried to act normal, helping him build the fire and prepare dinner. But inside I felt sick with fear. Every time I stepped away from the firelight to grab something from the tent or the cooler, I felt like eyes were watching me from the dark forest. That night we sat by the fire, eating pasta from our camping mugs and talking about random things. He seemed completely relaxed. The fire crackled and spat small sparks into the air. The trees around us were black shapes against the dark sky. After we ate, he lay back on his sleeping mat near the fire, looking up at the stars. I stayed sitting, hugging my knees, staring into the woods. Every small sound made my body flinch. I could hear owls calling to each other, insects buzzing in the grass, branches shifting with the breeze. But beneath it all, I kept thinking I heard footsteps. Very slow, very soft, just beyond the reach of the firelight. Eventually we put out the fire and crawled into the tent. I lay there in my sleeping bag, eyes wide open, listening to every sound outside. My friend fell asleep quickly, his breathing becoming deep and steady. I couldn't sleep. I lay there for what felt like hours, feeling my heart beating hard in my chest, feeling sweat trickle down my neck even though the air was cold. I could hear movement outside, faint but real. Leaves crunching, a stick breaking, then silence. Then another faint step somewhere behind the tent. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe loudly. I woke up around 4 in the morning, even before my alarm. The room felt cold, even though it was mid-July. I lay there listening to the silence for a while, feeling my eyes burn from the lack of sleep. I wasn't sure why I woke up so early. Maybe I was excited about the hike, or maybe it was because of the dream I was having before waking up, though I couldn't remember it. I reached over to the small table next to my bed and grabbed my phone. The screen's light hurt my eyes. I checked the time again, then scrolled through the notifications, though there wasn't much to see. I put the phone down and sat up. My back cracked loudly in the silent room. I rubbed my face for a while before standing up. The floor was cold under my feet as I walked to the small kitchen. I poured myself some water from the plastic bottle I kept next to the sink and drank it slowly. My throat felt dry. I thought about going back to sleep, but knew I wouldn't. My mind was awake now, running through everything I needed to pack for the hike. I had already set most things out the night before. My backpack, extra shirt, socks, a bag of almonds, 2 bottles of water, a first aid kit, and a small camping stove. I checked them again anyway, just to be sure I hadn't missed anything. I opened the fridge and took out a small packet of cheese and stuffed it in the side pocket of my bag. The sun wasn't up yet. Outside, the sky looked almost purple through the thin curtains. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, brushed my teeth, then tied my shoes tightly. Before leaving, I grabbed my phone and checked the route once again. The trail started about an hour's drive away. It was one of those old forestry roads that people hardly used anymore. My friend told me about it a few weeks ago. He said it was quiet, hardly anyone went there, and there were some amazing views from the ridgeline. I had been feeling stressed lately, stuck at work, staring at the same walls, listening to the same complaints from customers, so I thought this would be good for me. I locked the door behind me and walked down the empty street to my car. The air outside felt damp and smelled of dust and plants. I unlocked the car, threw my backpack onto the passenger seat, then sat down and started the engine. The radio turned on, but I turned it off right away. I didn't want any noise. I drove through the empty streets, passing closed shops and shuttered houses. Street lights flickered yellow over the cracked road. Once I got onto the highway, I felt calmer. The sky slowly turned lighter, a dark blue now, with the first hints of morning behind the hills. I reached the forestry road just after 5. I parked my car under some trees where the gravel widened. When I stepped out, I felt a chill. It was quiet, too quiet, with no wind or birds yet. I pulled my backpack on, checked my laces again, locked the car, and started walking down the trail. The path was narrow, with grass brushing against my legs. On both sides, tall pine trees rose, their trunks gray and rough. The smell of pine was strong and fresh. As I walked, the sky turned a softer blue, then pink in some places, and the first birds began to call out in short, sharp sounds. I took a deep breath. This was what I needed. The trail was steeper than I thought. After half an hour, I was sweating even though the morning was still cool. My shirt stuck to my back. I stopped to drink water and looked around. There was no one else. Just silence and the sound of my own breathing. I kept walking, feeling my legs burn a little as I climbed higher. At one point, I slipped slightly on loose gravel, but I caught myself before falling. My heart raced for a second. I looked down the slope behind me and felt a cold feeling in my chest thinking about what could happen if I fell here alone. After an hour, I reached a small clearing. I dropped my backpack on the grass and sat down. The sun was out now, throwing long yellow lines between the trees. I ate some almonds slowly, enjoying the crunch in my mouth. My breathing slowed. I leaned back against my bag and closed my eyes for a few minutes. When I opened them again, the sun was a little higher, and I felt ready to keep moving. I packed my things and walked on. The trail got narrower and rougher. There were fallen branches I had to step over, and once I had to climb around a tree that had fallen right across the path. I checked my phone to make sure I was still on track, though there was no signal here. I had downloaded the offline map the night before, so I felt okay. The map showed a viewpoint about another hour ahead. I wanted to reach there before it got too hot. As I walked, I started to feel uneasy. It was small things at first, a feeling like someone was watching me. Once I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing but trees and shadows. I told myself it was just my mind, that I had been stressed lately, but the feeling didn't leave. The trees felt closer here, darker. The birds had stopped calling, or maybe I just couldn't hear them anymore because of the blood rushing in my ears. I kept walking. The trail turned to the right and started climbing again. My legs felt heavy now. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a tree. That's when I noticed something strange. There were fresh marks on the tree trunk. Deep scratches, like someone had dragged a knife or something sharp down the bark. I touched them lightly. The wood felt rough and fresh. I looked around, scanning between the trees. The hair on my arms stood up. I didn't see anyone, but I felt exposed standing there, so I started walking again, a little faster this time. About 15 minutes later, I stopped again. This time, it was because I smelled something. A strong, thick smell like rotting meat. It hit me suddenly. I covered my nose with my shirt and looked around. To my left, a little off the trail, I saw something lying on the ground between some ferns. I stepped closer, feeling my stomach twist. It was a deer. Its body was torn open, ribs showing white between the dark red flesh. Flies covered it, buzzing loudly. I stared at it for a while. Its eyes were gone. I felt sick. I turned away and walked back to the trail quickly. My chest felt tight. I kept walking, trying to shake off the image, but it stayed in my mind. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every sound of the forest felt sharp. Branches cracking, leaves rustling, my own footsteps crunching on the dirt. I started to feel stupid for coming here alone. I thought about turning back, but the thought of walking past the dead deer again made me hesitate. I decided to keep going until the viewpoint. I told myself I would sit there for a while to calm down, eat something, then come back down quickly. The trail climbed steeply for the last 20 minutes. My calves burned with each step. My shirt was soaked with sweat now. When I finally reached the viewpoint, I felt relief. The trees opened up to a wide rocky ledge. I dropped my backpack and sat down on a flat rock. The view was amazing. Hills rolled out in front of me, covered in dark green trees, with the morning sun making the tops look almost golden. I breathed deeply. The cold air filled my lungs, and I felt a bit better. I sat there for about 15 minutes, eating cheese and almonds, drinking water slowly, feeling the cold rock under me. But that feeling didn't last long. The smell came again. That same thick, rotting smell. I froze. It was faint, but it was there, carried on the breeze coming up from below. I stood up and looked around. The forest behind me was silent. I couldn't hear anything now, not even birds. I felt my stomach twist again. I grabbed my backpack and put it on quickly. I felt like I needed to leave right away. I started walking down the trail, faster this time. My legs felt shaky from sitting too long. The trail was narrow and rocky, and I almost slipped again. The smell was still there, sometimes strong, sometimes fading, but always there. The feeling of being watched grew worse with each step. I kept looking over my shoulder, but saw nothing but trees and shadows. The sun was higher now, but it felt cold. I kept walking, trying to focus only on my feet and the trail ahead. About halfway down, I stopped suddenly. There were fresh footprints on the trail. They weren't mine. They were bigger, deeper, like someone wearing heavy boots. They went in the same direction I was going, down the trail. I felt sweat run down my back, cold and sticky. I looked around quickly, then started walking again, faster this time, almost jogging. My breath came out in short gasps, my chest tight. I followed the trail around a bend, and that's when I saw it. A man standing on the trail ahead. He was facing away from me, looking down the slope. He wore a dark jacket and old jeans. His hair was long and tangled. I stopped immediately. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I felt a sharp fear run through my chest. I didn't move. I didn't know what to do. My first thought was to turn around and go back up, but I couldn't make myself move. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, looking down into the trees below. I felt my legs shake. I forced myself to step back slowly, trying not to make a sound. I stepped on a small stick, and it snapped loudly. The man didn't move. He didn't turn around. He just kept standing there. I felt my throat close up. I stepped back again, then turned and started walking back up the trail, trying not to run. I didn't want to make noise, but I wanted to get away. After about 50 steps, I stopped and listened. Silence. I turned around slowly. The trail behind me was empty. I felt a wave of cold fear wash over me. I didn't know where he went. I looked around, scanning between the trees, but I saw nothing. My legs felt heavy as I started walking again. I wanted to get to the top and find another way down, but I didn't know if there was another way. My mind was racing with thoughts of what he was doing out here alone, why he didn't turn around, where he went. I walked faster. I woke up before dawn that day. The sky was still dark, only a faint blue line showing on the horizon beyond my window. I lay in bed for a moment listening to the silence in the house, just the low hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the ticking of the clock on my wall. I felt tired, my eyes burned a little, but I had to get up. I was supposed to leave early to reach the trailhead before the sun got too high. I had been planning this solo hike for weeks, studying maps late into the night, reading trip reports online, checking the weather every day to make sure there would be no storms. I got up and stretched, feeling my back pop and my shoulders loosen. I moved around my small room in silence, putting on my hiking pants and a gray quick-dry t-shirt. I packed the last few things in my backpack, my lunch, an extra bottle of water, a thin jacket, and my small first aid kit. My boots were waiting by the door, already dusty from other hikes. I tied them tight, double knotting the laces like always, then shrugged into my backpack and left the house. Outside, the air was cool and smelled like damp dirt and the faint sweetness of summer grass. Birds hadn't started singing yet. I walked across my yard to my old car, a silver hatchback with peeling paint on the roof. I got in and started the engine. The car rumbled awake, the sound echoing across the quiet street. I pulled out slowly, rolling down the window to let the cold breeze hit my face and wake me up more. The drive to the mountains took about an hour. The first half was through empty suburban streets, and then a stretch of highway with almost no cars. I kept looking at the eastern sky as it turned from navy blue to purple to pale pink, the sun still hidden behind the distant hills. I sipped lukewarm coffee from my thermos as I drove. The second half of the drive was along a winding mountain road with sharp turns and steep drop-offs. I drove slowly, keeping my eyes on the road, feeling the car lean a little with each tight curve. The pine trees rose up around me, dark shapes against the lightening sky. When I reached the trailhead parking lot, there were only 2 other cars parked there. I pulled into a space near the wooden information board. The lot was just dirt and gravel, with a single portable toilet in the corner. I turned off the engine and sat there for a minute, finishing the rest of my coffee. Then I got out and stretched again, breathing in the crisp mountain air. It smelled clean and sharp, mixed with the scent of pine needles and dry earth. I pulled my backpack on and started up the trail. The first mile was wide and gentle, an old fire road that climbed slowly through tall pine forest. The sun was still hidden behind the ridgeline, but the sky was bright now, a washed-out blue with no clouds. My boots crunched over the dirt and small stones. I could hear a few birds calling high up in the trees, and the faint rush of water somewhere far off to my right. I walked steadily, feeling my body wake up with each step. My breath came easy, the cold air filling my chest and making me feel alive. I passed a small clearing with a burned log in the middle, blackened and split from old lightning. The grass was flattened around it like deer had bedded there overnight. I kept walking. The trail narrowed and turned rocky as it climbed higher, weaving between boulders and tree roots. I had to step carefully, watching where I placed my feet so I wouldn't twist an ankle. After another mile, I reached a fork in the trail. The left path led up to the ridgeline where the main lookout point was, and the right path dropped down into a small canyon with a stream running through it. I paused there to drink some water, taking off my backpack for a moment and letting the weight off my shoulders. I decided to take the canyon route first. I wanted to see the stream before the sun rose too high and made the canyon hot. The trail down was steep and narrow, with loose dirt that slipped under my boots. I moved slowly, keeping my balance by lightly touching tree trunks as I passed. At the bottom, the stream was just a thin ribbon of water weaving between smooth rocks, clear and cold. Small insects hovered over the surface. I crouched down and dipped my fingers in, feeling the ice-cold sting of the mountain water. I sat there for a while on a flat rock, listening to the quiet gurgle of the stream and looking up at the trees that rose high above me, blocking out most of the sky. It felt peaceful, like I was completely alone in the world. I ate a protein bar, then put my backpack on again and started back up toward the fork. The climb was harder going up. My legs burned, and I had to stop once to catch my breath, wiping sweat from my forehead with my shirt sleeve. When I reached the fork again, I turned onto the ridgeline trail. The sun was fully up now, shining through the trees and making long shadows across the ground. The trail climbed steadily, winding around large granite outcrops and fallen logs. I felt a faint breeze on my face as I walked, carrying the warm smell of sun-baked pine needles. After about another hour, I reached the top. The trail opened out onto a rocky ridge with a wide view over the valley below. I could see rolling hills covered in trees, the faint glint of the river far off, and the hazy line of distant mountains on the horizon. I stood there for a while, breathing hard from the climb, feeling sweat run down my back under my shirt. I dropped my backpack on the ground and sat on a flat rock to rest. I pulled out my water bottle and drank deeply, feeling the cool water fill my mouth and throat. As I sat there, I noticed a faint trail leading off the main ridge path, half hidden by bushes and tall grass. It wasn't on the map I had studied, and it looked old, like it hadn't been used much. Curiosity pulled at me. I felt a small hesitation in my chest, but I told myself I had enough water and daylight to explore a little. I packed up my things and started down the faint trail. The path was narrow and uneven, weaving between boulders and low trees. I kept ducking under branches, pushing aside tall grass that brushed against my legs. After about 20 minutes, the trail widened into a small flat area surrounded by rocks. In the middle, there was an old rusted fire ring made from stones, and a few pieces of broken wood scattered around. It looked like an old campsite that hadn't been used in years. The ground was covered in pine needles and dry leaves. I stood there looking around, taking it all in. The silence felt heavy here, deeper than before. There was no wind, no birds, just the sound of my own breathing and the faint thump of my heartbeat in my ears. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, like I was being watched, but when I turned around there was nothing but trees and rocks. I shook off the feeling and moved closer to the fire ring, crouching down to look at the old charred wood. It was soft and crumbled under my fingers, falling apart into black powder. Suddenly I heard a rustle behind me. I froze, every muscle in my body going tight. The sound was faint but close, like something moving through the dry grass and pine needles. I turned my head slowly, scanning the trees. For a long moment I saw nothing. Then I saw it. At first I thought it was a deer. It was about the right size, standing between two pine trees about 30 feet away. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't a deer. It was a man. He was wearing dark clothes. His hair was long and tangled, and his beard reached almost to his chest. His skin looked dark with dirt and sun. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, staring at me. I couldn't see his eyes clearly, but I could feel them on me, locked onto my face. My heart started pounding, so hard I felt it in my throat. My hands started shaking a little. I stood up slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. He didn't move. He just stood there, half hidden by the trees and bushes. I felt fear crawl up my spine and spread through my chest. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to turn my back on him, but I also didn't want to stand there frozen. I took a small step backward. He still didn't move. I took another step. My boots crunched softly over the pine needles. I turned and started walking back the way I came, trying not to run, trying to keep my breathing steady. Every step felt heavy. I felt like I was being hunted. My skin crawled with the feeling of eyes on my back. After a few minutes, I stopped and looked back. I couldn't see him anymore, just trees and rocks and bushes. But I didn't feel any better. I turned and kept walking faster, pushing branches aside, stumbling a little on the uneven ground. I felt panic starting to build in my chest, tightening my throat. I told myself to keep calm, to keep moving, to get back to the main trail as quickly as I could. When I finally reached the main trail, I stopped to catch my breath. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my hands were trembling. I looked back one more time. The faint trail was empty, silent, just as before. I turned and started walking down the main trail, heading back toward the parking lot. I kept glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, half expecting to see him following me, but there was nothing. The walk back felt endless. Every sound in the forest felt louder. The rustle of leaves in the breeze, the chirp of birds, the creak of tree trunks. My senses felt sharp and raw, tuned to every movement and sound around me. My feet ached, and my shoulders burned from the weight of my backpack, but I didn't stop. I kept walking, faster than before, almost at a jog in some places where the trail was wide enough. When I finally reached the parking lot, I felt a wave of relief wash over me so strong my knees went weak for a moment. My car was still there, silent and waiting. The other two cars were gone. The lot was empty. I walked quickly to my car, unlocked it with shaking hands, and threw my backpack onto the back seat. I got in and locked the doors immediately. I sat there for a moment, breathing hard, my heart still racing. I looked out at the trailhead, half expecting to see him emerge from the trees, but there was nothing, just the sun. I woke up early that morning. My eyes were dry and my head felt heavy, like I hadn't slept at all. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking down at the floor, trying to get myself to stand up. My back hurt from the way I had slept, twisted up like a pretzel, but I finally got to my feet and went to the bathroom. My plan was simple: take a shower, make some coffee, get in the truck, and drive down to the lake to fish. I needed a break from people. Work had been exhausting. Everyone just wanted something from me every day, and I felt like my life was turning into the same empty routine. So I wanted peace for a few hours. After I showered, I packed my fishing rod, a small tackle box, a bottle of water, and an old ham sandwich wrapped in foil that I found in the fridge from the night before. I didn't care. It wasn't moldy, and I wasn't in the mood to cook. I locked the house and walked down the driveway to my truck. The sun hadn't come up yet, but the sky was turning pale blue and purple on the horizon. The air was cold, and the ground felt damp under my boots. I unlocked the truck and climbed in. The seat was cold, and I sat there rubbing my hands together before starting the engine. The drive down to the lake was about 40 minutes along winding roads, past farmhouses, a small abandoned gas station, and fields that smelled like wet dirt and old grass. I kept the window open a crack to feel the breeze. It helped wake me up. There was no one else on the road, which felt good. I didn't even turn on the radio. I just listened to the tires on the pavement and the low hum of the engine. When I pulled up near the lake, I parked on the dirt shoulder beside the old wooden fence. It was falling apart in places, with broken slats leaning out like crooked teeth. I got out of the truck and grabbed my gear from the back seat. The sun was just rising behind the trees across the water, making the lake glow gold and orange. It was beautiful. I stood there for a minute, just breathing in the cold air and listening to the quiet. There were birds singing somewhere, and I could hear insects buzzing close to the ground. I walked down the narrow trail to the bank and found a flat rock to sit on. I set my rod up and cast out into the calm water. The float bobbed gently, and I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in days. I sat there fishing for a while, eating half of my sandwich and drinking water. I watched the sun climb higher. Everything felt calm and normal. But then I heard something behind me. It was just a soft crunch at first, like someone stepping on dry leaves or twigs. I didn't look back right away. I thought it was probably a deer or maybe a raccoon. I kept fishing, but then I heard it again a bit closer. I turned around slowly and looked into the trees. There was nothing there, just shadows and thin beams of morning light cutting through the branches. I tried to ignore it and kept fishing. After a few minutes, I felt like someone was watching me. That feeling crawled up the back of my neck and settled deep in my chest. I turned around again, scanning the trees, looking for any movement. That's when I saw a shape between two tree trunks. It was just a dark shape. At first I thought it was part of the tree, but then it moved slightly. I couldn't make out what it was, just that it was tall and wide. My first thought was that it was a bear, so I stood up slowly, keeping my rod pointed down, and picked up a rock to make noise if I needed to. The shape didn't move closer, but it didn't go away either. It just stood there. I couldn't see a face or clear details. My chest tightened, and I felt my heart thudding hard. I started gathering my tackle box and water bottle with shaking hands, trying to keep my eyes on the shape. I backed up slowly onto the trail and walked towards my truck, glancing back every few seconds. The shape was still there, but it wasn't following me. When I reached my truck, I tossed everything into the passenger seat and got in quickly. I locked the doors and sat there, breathing hard, staring into the trees. I felt stupid for being so scared, but something about that shape felt wrong. It wasn't normal. I started the truck and drove away, checking the rearview mirror over and over. Nothing followed me. I drove straight home. The whole time, my hands were shaking and my chest felt tight. When I got to my driveway, I turned off the engine and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, feeling like my body was made of stone. Finally, I got out and went inside. I left all my fishing gear in the truck. I didn't care. Inside, the house felt dark and silent. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall for a long time, thinking about what I saw. I told myself it was just a bear, or maybe a tree stump that looked strange in the morning light. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a tree stump. It was watching me. I could feel it. The way it stood so still and didn't move felt wrong. The next day, I tried to forget about it. I went to work like normal, but I kept thinking about the lake and that shape in the woods. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the ticking of my wall clock, thinking about going back there to check what it was. The thought of it made my stomach twist, but at the same time, I wanted to know. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering. So the next morning, I woke up early again. I didn't shower this time. I just put on my jeans, boots, and an old hoodie. I grabbed a flashlight and a long hunting knife I kept in the shed, just in case. I drove back to the lake as the sun was coming up. The sky was gray that day, with low heavy clouds that made everything look darker and colder. When I parked at the same spot, I sat in my truck for a while, gripping the steering wheel. My hands were sweating, and I felt sick with fear. Finally, I forced myself to get out. I walked down the same trail, scanning the trees carefully. Birds were chirping, but everything felt heavy and silent at the same time. When I reached the fishing spot, I looked across the bank and into the trees where I had seen the shape. I couldn't see anything from where I stood. I gripped the knife tighter and started walking into the trees, stepping over fallen branches and pushing through bushes that snagged my jeans. My boots sank into damp dirt with every step, and the smell of rotting leaves and wet wood filled my nose. I kept walking slowly, scanning everything. Then I saw it. There was a small clearing ahead with an old rusted metal barrel in the middle. Around it, the ground was littered with beer cans, plastic bags, and broken glass bottles. It looked like a place where people came to drink and party at night. The barrel had black burn marks around the rim, and there were ashes inside. I walked closer, looking around. There were footprints in the dirt, lots of them, mixed up and layered on top of each other. Some looked fresh. That's when I noticed something hanging from a tree branch nearby. It was a rope tied into a noose. My chest tightened, and my mouth went dry. It looked old, but I didn't like seeing it there. It felt wrong. Under the branch, the ground was disturbed, like someone had kicked at the dirt or dragged their feet. I backed away, feeling cold all over. I turned around to leave, but that's when I heard it again. That same crunch of leaves. I spun around, scanning the trees. This time, I saw a person standing there, partially hidden behind a thick tree trunk. I could see part of their shoulder and arm. They wore a dark jacket with the hood up. I couldn't see their face. My stomach twisted into knots. I felt like I was going to throw up. I gripped the knife tighter, my knuckles turning white. I took a step back, and the person moved slightly, leaning out just enough for me to see more of them. They were tall and thin. Their jeans were dirty, and their shoes looked old and torn. I didn't wait to see what they wanted. I turned and started walking fast back towards the trail, pushing through bushes and stumbling over roots. My breathing was loud in my ears, and my heart was slamming against my ribs so hard it hurt. I kept looking back over my shoulder. At first, I didn't see them, but then I caught a glimpse of movement between the trees, following me. They weren't running, just walking at the same pace, keeping their distance. When I reached the trail, I broke into a run. My boots pounded the dirt, and sweat dripped down my back. I could hear my own ragged breathing, and I didn't care how loud I was. I just wanted to get to my truck. When I reached it, I yanked the door open, jumped inside, and locked it. I sat there, panting, scanning the trees. I didn't see them, but I didn't feel safe. I started the engine and drove away fast, spraying dirt and rocks behind me. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely keep the truck straight on the road. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see them running after me. But the road was empty. When I got home, I locked all the doors and closed the curtains. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, feeling like my entire body was going to collapse. I stayed there for hours, thinking about what happened. Who was that person? What were they doing out there so early in the morning? Why were they just standing there, watching me? I never went back to that lake again. For weeks after, I kept looking out the windows at night, expecting to see someone standing at the edge of my yard. I couldn't sleep properly. Every sound made me jump. Even the neighbor's cat walking across my porch at 2 a.m. made my heart feel like it was going to explode. Months passed, and eventually, the fear faded a little, but it never went away completely. Even now, sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night and look out the window, I half expect to see a tall, thin figure standing under the streetlight, just watching my house. I tell myself it was probably just some homeless person living in the woods, someone who didn't want to be seen. But deep down, I know how it felt to be watched that morning. That wasn't just someone passing through. They were there for a reason, and I still don't know what it was. But I do know one thing for sure. I will never go back to that lake alone again. I don't care how calm the water looks at sunrise or how quiet the woods are in the morning. Some places are better left alone.